Alexandre Dumas. Captain Paul. Narrated by Raymond Haggart. The admirers of The Pilot, one of the most magnificent of Cooper's novels, have evinced a general feeling of regret in which we ourselves have deeply participated, that the book once finished, we altogether lose sight of the mysterious being whom we have followed with such intense interest through the narrows of the Devil's Grip and the cloisters of St. Ruth. There is in the physiognomy, in the language, and in the actions of this person, introduced in the first place by the name of John, and afterwards under that of Paul, a melancholy so profound, a grief so bitter, a contempt of life of such intense a nature that every reader desires to become acquainted with the motives which influence so brave and generous a heart. For ourselves, we acknowledge that we have more than once been tempted, however indiscreet to say the least of it, might have been to write to Cooper himself and ask him for information regarding the earlier career and closing years of this adventurous seaman. Information which we vainly searched for in his narrative. I thought that such a request would be readily forgiven by him, to whom it was addressed, for it would have been accompanied with the expression of the most sincere and ardent admiration of his work. But I was restrained by the reflection that the author himself perhaps knew no more of that career of which he had given us but an episode, than that portion of it which had been illuminated by the sun of American independence. For, in fact, this brilliant meteor had passed from the clouds which environed his birth to the obscurity of his death in such a manner that it was quite possible the poet-historian, being far distant from the place where his hero was born and from the country in which he died, knew no more of him than what he has transmitted to us. I then consulted our living library, Noddia the learned, Noddia the philosopher, Noddia the poet. After reflecting for a few moments, he mentioned a small book written by Paul Jones himself, containing memoirs of his life, bearing this motto: Munera sunt laudi. I started off to hunt for this precious relic, but it was in vain. I searched through libraries, rummaged the old bookstalls. All that I could find was an infamous label entitled, which I threw from me with disgust. Before I had got through the 4th page, marvelling that poison should be so enduring and be perfectly preserved, whilst we search in vain for wholesome and nutritious food, I therefore renounced all hope in this quarter. Some time afterwards, while taking a voyage along our coast, having started from Cherbourg, I visited St. Malo, Quimper, and Orient. Upon my arrival at the latter place, I recollected having read in a biography of Paul Jones that this celebrated seaman had been there 3 times in that port. This circumstance has struck me. I had noted down the dates and had only to open my pocket-book to ascertain them. I examined the naval archives, and in them I actually found entries of the sojourn in which the 2 frigates, the Hanger of 18 guns and the Indienne of 32, had made in these roads. As to the reason for their coming here, whether from ignorance or neglect, the secretary who had kept the register had omitted to assign them. I was just leaving the office without further information when I thought of inquiring of an old clerk who was sitting there. Whether there was no traditional recollection in the country as to the captain of these 2 ships, the old man told me that in 1784 he, being then a boy and employed in the quarantine office at Havre, had seen Paul Jones there. He was at that time a commodore in the fleet of the Count de Vaudreuil. The renowned courage of this officer and his extraordinary exploits had made such an impression upon him that upon the clerk's return to Brittany, he spoke of him to his father, who then had charge of the Chateau d'Auray. Upon hearing the name of Paul Jones, the old man started and made a sign to him to be silent. The young man obeyed, though not without astonishment. He frequently afterwards questioned his father upon the subject, but he always refused to satisfy his curiosity. It was not until after the death of the Marchioness d'Ore, and the immigration of her son the Marquis, and the dispersion of the family at the Revolution, that the old man felt himself permitted to reveal even to his son the strange and mysterious history in which that of the object of my inquiries was so singularly blended. Although nearly 40 years had passed away since his father had related this eventful history, it had made so deep an impression upon him that he repeated it to me, as he assured me nearly word for word. And even with much greater interest than before, for thanks to the researches I had made, the hero was no longer to me an unknown being, appearing only for an instant, his face but partially visible, and with merely the portion of a name. He had now become a friend, almost a brother to me. For new sympathies had been awakened in my heart, besides those which had formerly been inspired by recitals of the expedition to Whitehaven. These led me to reflect that whatever of interest and disappointment I had experienced on reading Cooper's novel, they must have been entertained alike by others, and that the anxious desire I had felt to know more of the former lover of Alice Dunscombe was not a feeling peculiar to myself, but would be participated by all those, and their numbers must be great, who have followed this skilful seaman from the moment of his first meeting Lieutenant Barnstable on the English cliffs until that in which he quit the Alert to land on the shores of Holland. I have therefore gathered up my recollections and have written this history. How as her side the rustling cable rings, the sails are furled, and anchoring round she swings, and gathering loiters on the land discern her boat descending from the lattice stern. 'Tis manned, the oars keep concert to the strand, till grates her keel upon the shallow sand. Byron. Toward the close of a fine evening in the month of October, 1779, the most inquisitive among the inhabitants of the small town of Fort Louis had assembled on the point of land immediately opposite to that of which stands the city of Lorient. The object which attracted their attention, and which was the subject of their inquiries, was a noble, beautiful frigate, carrying 32 guns, which had been anchored for about a week, not in the port, but in a small cove in the roadstead, and which had been perceived for the first time early one morning, like an ocean flower which had suddenly blossomed during the night. From the elegance and coquettish appearance of this frigate, it was imagined that this was the first time of her putting to sea. She bore the French flag, for the 3 golden fleur-de-lis were seen glittering in the last rays of the setting sun. That which above all appeared to excite the curiosity of the admirers of this spectacle, so frequent and notwithstanding always so interested in a seaport, was the uncertainty as to the country in which this vessel had been built. For having all her sails clewed up and snugly stowed around her yards, showed in the setting sun the graceful outline of her hull, and a minute elegance as to her running rigging. Some thought they could discern in her the bold and taut masts used by the Americans, but the perfection exemplified in the finish which distinguished the rest of her construction was in perfect contrast with the barbarous rudeness of those rebellious children of England. Others, deceived by the flag she had hoisted, were endeavouring to divine in what port of France she had been launched. But their national pride soon gave way to the conviction that she was not built in France, for they sought in vain for those heavy galleries, ornamented with sculpture, which is the compulsory decoration of the stern of every daughter of the ocean, or of the Mediterranean. Born on the stocks of Brest, or of Toulon. Others, again, knowing that the flags were frequently used as a mask to hide the real face, maintained that the Lion and the Towers of Spain would have more properly been placed upon the ensign waving from her peak than the 3 fleur-de-lis of France. but the latter was asked whether the straight and elegant size and quarters of the frigate all resembled the bulging build of Spanish galleons. In short, there were some among them who would have sworn that this beautiful fairy of the waters had been brought to life among the frogs of Holland, had not the dangerous boldness of her masks and rigging fully contradicted the suggestion that she had been built by those old but prudent sweepers of the seas. But as we have said, for 8 whole days, and ever since the first appearance of this splendid vision upon the coast of Brittany, she had been the constant theme of wonder and of conversation, for nothing had happened to give them any positive information, as not any individual from the crew had landed from the ship under any pretext whatever. They might indeed have doubted whether she had a crew or not, had not they now and then seen the head of a sentinel, or of an officer of watch peering above the bulwarks. It appeared, however, that this vessel, although she had not communicated with the shore, could not have any hostile intention. Her arrival had not seemed to give the least uneasiness to the public authorities of Lorient, for she had run under the guns of a small fort, which the recent declaration of war between England and France had caused to be put into order, and which displayed the battery of long guns of heavy calibre. Among this crowd of idlers, however, there was a young man who was remarked for the anxious eagerness of his inquiries, without anyone being able to devise the cause. It was easily perceived that he felt some direct interest in this mysterious vessel. Among this crowd of idlers, however, there was a young man who was remarked for the anxious eagerness of his inquiries, without anyone being able to devise the cause. It was easily perceived that he felt some direct interest in this mysterious vessel. His brilliant uniform was that of the mouse critters, and as these royal guards rarely left the capital, he had at first directed a portion of the public curiosity to himself. But it was soon discovered that this person, whom they thought a stranger, was the young Count d'Ore, the last scion of one of the most ancient families of Brittany. The castle inhabited by his family rose above the shores of the Gulf of Morbihan, at least 6 or 7 leagues distant from Fort Louis. The family consisted of the Marquis d'Ore, a poor, insane old man who for 20 years had never been seen beyond the boundaries of his estates; of the Marchionette d'Ore, whose rigid morality and whose ancient nobility could alone excuse her haughty and aristocratic bearing; of the young Marguerite, a sweet girl of 17 or 18 years of age, delicate and pale as the flowers whose name she bore; and of Count Emmanuel, whom we have mentioned above, and around whom the crowds had gathered, carried away, as it always is, by a sounding title, a brilliant uniform, and noble and lordly manners. However eager might have been the desire of those he addressed to satisfy his curiosity, they could only answer his questions with a vague and undecided manner, all they knew of the frigate being mere conjecture. The Count was about retiring from the jetty when he perceived a 6-oared boat approaching it. At a moment when curiosity had been so much excited, this incident could not fail to attract all eyes. In the stern of the boat sat a young man who appeared to be 20 to 22 years of age, and who was dressed in the uniform of a lieutenant of the Royal Navy. He was sitting, or rather lying, upon a bearskin, one hand reclining carelessly on the tiller of the small boat, while the coxswain, who, thanks to the caprice of his officer, had nothing to do, was sitting in the bow. From the moment that it first made its appearance, every eye was directed towards it, as if it contained the means of solving the mystery which has so much puzzled them. The boat, urged on by the last efforts of its oarsmen, took the ground at 8 or 10 feet distance from the beach, there being too little water in that place to allow it to come nearer. 2 of the sailors jumped into the sea up to their knees. The young lieutenant then rose up in a careless way, walked to the bow of the boat, and allowed the two sailors to carry him in their arms to the beach, so that not a drop of salt water should soil his elegant uniform. He then ordered his men to double the point of land, which advanced about 300 feet into the sea, and to go and wait for him on the opposite side of the battery. As for himself, he stopped a moment on the beach to arrange his dress, which had been a little disordered by the rough mode of transport he had been compelled to adopt, and then he advanced humming a French air towards the gate of a small fort, which he passed after having slightly returned the military salute of the sentinel on duty. Although nothing could, in a seaport, be more natural than a naval officer should cross the roads and walk into a fort, the minds of the lookers-on had been so much occupied with the foreign vessel that there was hardly one among the crowd who did not imagine that this visit to the commandant of the fort had some relation to her. So that when the young officer issued from it, he found himself surrounded so closely by the crowd that for a moment he appeared half inclined to use the rattan which he carried in his hand to make way through it. However, after having flourished it with impertinent affectation above the heads of those who were nearest him, he appeared all at once to change his mind, and perceived Count Emmanuel, whose distinguished appearance and elegant uniform contrasted strikingly with the vulgar air and habiliments of the persons who surrounded him. He made a few steps towards him at the same moment that the Count had advanced to meet him. The two officers merely exchanged a rapid glance, but that look at once assured both that they were persons of rank and station. They immediately saluted each other with that easy grace and affable politeness which characterized the young nobility of that period. "By heaven," exclaimed the young midshipman, "my dear countryman, for I suppose that like myself you are a Frenchman, although I meet you in a seemingly hyperborean land and in regions which, if not absolutely savage, appear sufficiently barbarous, will you have the goodness to tell me what there is so extraordinary about me, that I seem to cause quite a revolution in the country? Or is the appearance of an officer of the navy an event so rare and so extraordinary at Lorient, that his mere presence excites in so singular a degree the curiosity of the natives of Lower Brittany? By solving this mystery, you will render me a service which I shall be happy to reciprocate, should any opportunity present itself in which I can be useful to you." "This will be so much more the easy," replied Count Emmanuel, "as this curiosity is not founded in any feeling which you would consider offensive to your uniform or hostile to your person, and the proof of this is, my dear comrade, for I see by your epaulets that we are of equal rank in the service of His Majesty, that I participate with these honest Britons in the curiosity which they evict, although perhaps my motives are more weighty than theirs, in endeavouring to obtain a solution to the problem which has occupied us. If I can be of any assistance to you in the inquiries which you have undertaken, I place all the algebra I possess at your disposal. Only the position we are in is not a comfortable one to carry out mathematical demonstrations. Will it please you to remove to a small distance from these honest people, whose presence would only tend to confuse our calculations?" "Certainly," replied the mouse-quitter, "and the more readily as, if I do not deceive myself, by walking this way I shall lead you nearer to your boat and your sailors." "Oh, that is not of the slightest consequence. Should this path not be convenient to you, we can take another. I have plenty of time, and my men are less eager to return on board than I am. Therefore we will about ship, if such is your good pleasure." "Not at all. On the contrary, let us go on. The nearer we are to the beach, the better we can discuss the matter in question. Let us therefore walk upon this strip of land as far as we can." The young seaman, without replying a word, continued to walk on, like a man to whom the direction he was to take was perfectly indifferent. And these two young men, who had thus met for the first time, walked arm in arm as though they had been friends from infancy towards the end of the promontory. When they had reached the extreme point, Count Emmanuel paused and pointed towards the frigate, saying, "Do you know what ship that is?" The young seaman threw a rapid and scrutinizing glance upon the mouse-quitter and then looked towards the ship. "Yes," replied he, negligently. "It is a pretty frigate carrying 32 guns with the sails bent and a starboard anchor atrip, ready to sail at the first signal given." "Excuse me," replied Emmanuel, smiling. "That is not what I asked of you. It signifies little to me how many guns she carries, or by what anchor she is holding. Is not that your technical mode of speaking?" The lieutenant smiled in turn. "But," continued Emmanuel, "what I wish to know is, to what nation she actually belongs, the port that she is bound to." "As to the nation she belongs to," replied the lieutenant, "she has taken care to give us that information herself, or she's an outrageous liar. Do you not see her flag flying from her peak? It is the flag without a stain, rather worn out from being too much used, that's all. As to the place where she is bound to, it is as the commandant of the fort told you when you asked him. Mexico." Emmanuel looked with astonishment at the young lieutenant. "And finally, as to her captain, that is a much more difficult matter. There are some people who would swear he is a young man about my own age, or yours, for I believe we left the cradle pretty close the one after the other, although the professions we follow may place a long interval between our graves. There are others who pretend he is of an age with my uncle the Count d'Estrange, who, as you doubtless know, has just been made an admiral, and who is at this moment affording every assistance to the rebels of America, as some people even in France still call them. But in short, as to his name, that is quite another thing. It is said he does not know it himself, and until some fortunate occurrence shall apprise himself of it, he calls himself Paul." "Paul?" "Yes, Captain Paul." "Paul what?" "Paul, of the Providence, of the Banger, of the Alliance, according to the name of the ship he commands. Are there not also in France some of our young nobles who, finding their family name too short, lengthen it out by the name of an estate and surmount the whole with a knight's casque or a baron's coronet, so that their seals or their carriages bear the evidence of belonging to some ancient family quite delightful to reflect upon? Well, so it is with him. At this moment he calls himself, I believe, Paul of the Indienne, and he is proud of that appellation. If I may judge from my naval sympathies, I do not think he would exchange his frigate for the finest estate to be found between the port of Brest and the mouth of the Rhone." "But tell me," rejoined Emmanuel, after reflecting for a moment on the singular mixture of simplicity and sarcasm which pervaded the answers of his companion, "what is the character of this man?" "His character? But my dear Baron, Count, Marquis—" "Count," replied Emmanuel, bowing. "Well, my dear Count, then I was about to say that you pursued me from one abstraction to another, and that when I placed at your disposal all my knowledge in algebra, I did not intend that we should end to his character. Good heavens, my dear Count, who can speak knowingly of the character of a man unless it be himself? And even then— But hold! I, myself, as you now see me, have ploughed for 20 years, at one time with the keel of a brig, at another with that of a frigate, this vast expanse, which now extends itself before us. My eyes, for so I may express myself, discerned the ocean almost at the same moment that they saw the sky above it. Since my tongue was able to join two words together, or my comprehension could combine two ideas, I have interrogated and studied the caprices of the ocean, and yet I do not, even to this time, know its character. and there are only 4 principal winds and 32 breezes which agitate it. That's all. How, then, can you expect that I should judge of man, torn as he is by 1,000 passions? Nor did I ask you, my dear Duke, Marquis, Count? Lieutenant, replied the young sailor, bowing, as Emmanuel had done before. I was about to say then, my dear Lieutenant, I do not ask a physiological lecture on the passions of Captain Paul. I only wish to inform myself upon 2 points. Firstly, whether you consider him a man of honour. We must first of all understand each other as to the meaning of the words, my dear Count. What is your precise definition of the word honour? Permit me to remark, my dear Lieutenant, that this question is a most singular one, honour. Why? Honour is honour. That's it precisely. A word without a definition, like the word God. God is God. And everyone creates a god after his own fashion. The Egyptians adored him under the form of a scorpion, the Israelites under that of a golden calf. So it is with honour. There is the honour of Camillus, and that of Coriolanus, that of the Cid, and that of Count Julian. Define your question better if you wish me to reply to it. I ask then whether his word may be relied upon. I do not believe he ever failed in that regard. His enemies, and no one can arrive to his station without having them, even his enemies, I say, have never doubted that he would keep, even upon death, an oath which he had sworn to. This point is, therefore, believe me, fully settled. In this respect he is a man of honour. Let us pass. Therefore, to your second question, for if I do not deceive myself, you wish to know something further. Yes, I wish to know whether he would faithfully obey an order given by His Majesty. What Majesty? Really, my dear Lieutenant, you affect a difficulty of comprehension which would better suit the gown of a sophist than a naval uniform. Why so? You accuse me of cavilling because before replying I wish to know precisely what I have to answer. We have at this present time 8 or 10 majesties, seated securely or otherwise upon the different thrones of Europe. We have His Catholic Majesty, a feeble majesty who allows the inheritance left by Charles V to be torn from him piece by piece. We have His Britannic Majesty, a headstrong majesty who clings to his Americas as Sarnegetus to the Prussian ship, and whose hands we shall cut off if he does not lose his hold. We have His Christian Majesty, who I venerate and honour. Well, it is him I wish to speak, said Emmanuel. Do you believe that Captain Paul would feel disposed to obey an order which I should deliver from him? Captain Paul, replied the lieutenant, would, as every captain ought to do, obey every order emanating from a power which has the right of commanding him, unless, indeed, he has been an accursed pirate, or some damned privateerman, some buccaneer who owes no allegiance, and which I should doubt from the appearance of the frigate he commands, and from the way she is fitted. He must have then in some drawer of his cabin a commission signed by some power or other. Well, should this commission bear the name of Louis and be sealed with the fleur-de-lis of France, there can be no doubt that we would obey any order sealed and signed by the same name. This is all then that I wish to be informed of, replied the young mouse-critter, who began to grow impatient at the strange and invasive answers given by his companion. I will only ask you one more question. I am ready to obey your wishes in that, as I have in the rest, Count, returned the lieutenant. Do you know any way of getting on board of that ship? There is one, replied the lieutenant, pointing towards his own boat, which lay rocked by the waves in a small creek close to them. That boat? Why, it is yours. Well, I will take you on board." "You know Captain Paul, then?" "I? Not in the least. But as nephew of an admiral, I am naturally acquainted with every officer of a ship, from a boatswain who pipes the hands aloft to the rear admiral who commands a squadron. Besides which, we sailors have secret signs among us, a certain Masonic language, by which we know one another as brothers in whatever part of the ocean we may meet. You may therefore accept my proposal with the same frankness in which I offer it. I, my rowers, and my boat are at your disposal." "Do me this service then," said Emmanuel, "and you will forgive me for the annoyance I have caused by my tergiversations, will you not?" said the lieutenant. "You cannot be surprised at it," continued he, smiling. "My dear Count, the solitude of a seaman's life has given to us children of the sea the habit of soliloquizing. During a calm we invoke the winds, during the tempest we invoke the calm, and during the nights we address ourselves to God." Emmanuel again looked doubtingly at his companion, who met his gaze with that apparent good-tempered simplicity which had appeared to spread over his features every time he became the object of investigation to the Mousequitter. The latter was surprised at this mixture of contempt for human things and of poetic feelings towards the works of God. But finding that this singular man was disposed to render him, although in a strange manner, the service he had asked of him, he accepted his proffered assistance. 5 minutes afterwards, the two young men were advancing towards the unknown vessel with as much rapidity as the vigour of 6 stout rowers could give to the light bark in which they were seated. Their oars rose and fell with such regular movement that it appeared rather impelled by some powerful machine than by the combination of human strength. And oh, the little warlike world within! The well-reeved guns, the netted canopy, the how's command, the busy humming din. When at a word the tops are manned on high, hark to the boatswain call the cheery cry, while through the seaman's hands the tackles glide, or schoolboy midshipman that, standing by, strains his shrill pipe, as good or ill betides, and well the docile crew that skilful urchin guides. Byron. As they advanced, the graceful form of the ship became more and more clearly defined, and although the vocation of the Count did not lead him to admire beauty under such a form, yet he could not avoid being struck by the graceful model of her construction, the loftiness and strength of her masts, and the elegance of her rigging, which appeared, as it stood out against the richly tinted sky reddened by the setting sun, to be composed of flexible and silky fibres, spun by some gigantic spider. There was not, however, any appearance of movement on board the ship which seemed, either from inattention or contempt, to care but little for the visit she was about to receive. The young Mousequitter thought, however, at one point, that he perceived the end of a telescope peeping out of one of the portholes near the muzzle of a gun, and which was pointed towards the boat. But the ship, being gently moved round by the quiet heaving of the waves, presented her prow towards them. This attention was attracted by the figurehead, which generally bears some allusion to the name of the vessel that it decorates. It was a representation of one of the daughters of America, discovered by Columbus and conquered by Cortez, with a headdress of many-coloured feathers, her bosom naked, and ornamented with a coral necklace. As to the remainder of the figure, it was a curious combination, half siren, half serpent, attached to the forepart of the ship in a graceful though fantastic form. The nearer the boat approached the ship, the more did the attention of the Count appear attracted by this figure. It was in fact a sculpture, not only singular as to form, but very remarkable from the finish of its execution, and it was easy to perceive that this was not the work of vulgar hands, but had been carved by a superior artist. The lieutenant remarked, with the satisfaction of a seaman, the increased admiration which appeared in the countenance of the soldier, and at last perceived that his attention was concentrated on the figurehead we have described. He seemed to wait with impatience that the latter should express his opinions upon it, but finding that he did not give any, although they were near enough not to lose any of its beauty, he took upon himself to be the first to speak and to question his young companion. Said he, concealing the interest which he took in his reply under the apparent gaiety, "What do you think of this masterpiece?" "I think," replied Emmanuel, "that comparing it with works of the same description which I have seen, it merits the appellation which you have given it." "Yes," said the lieutenant carelessly. "It is the last work of William Costeau, who died before he had completed it. It was finished by one of his pupils named Dupré, a man of genius who is starving and who is obliged to carve wood for want of marble, and to cut figureheads of ships, when he ought to be employed sculpturing statues." "See," said he, giving an impulsion to the rudder which lay then across her bows. "It is a real necklace of coral that she wears, and they are real pearls that are hanging from her ears. As to her eyes, each pupil is a diamond worth 100 guineas. The captain who takes this frigate will, besides the honour of capturing her, have a splendid wedding present to offer to his bride." "What an odd caprice," explained Emmanuel, carried away by the singularity of the object he was gazing at, "to ornament a ship in the same way that one would an animated being, and to risk considerable sums to the chances of a battle or the dangers of a storm." "Why should this astonish you?" said the lieutenant with an accent of indescribable melancholy. "We seamen have no other family than our sailors, no other country but the ocean, no gorgeous pageants but the tempest, no amusements but the battle. We must attach ourselves to something, having no real mistresses, for whom would love us seagulls who are always on the wing. We must therefore shape to ourselves an imaginary love. The one becomes enamoured of some verdant and shady island, and every time he perceives one in the distance, rising from the ocean like a flower garden, his heart becomes as joyous as that of a bird when returning to its nest. Another selects some favourite star from out the firmament, and during the long and lovely nights on the Atlantic, every time he passes the equator, it appears to him that it approaches nearer to him and salutes him with a more vivid light. There are others, and they are the greater number, who attach themselves to their frigate, as to a well-beloved daughter, who groans whenever the tempest tears away any part of her, at every wound given by the shot that strikes her, and when she is at length sunk by the tempest or of the combat, prefer to perish with her, rather than save themselves without her, given to landsmen a holy example of fidelity. Captain Paul is one of the latter class, that's all, and he has given to his frigate the wedding present which is intended for his bride. Ah, I see they are waking up." "Boat ahoy!" cried someone from aboard the frigate. "What boat's that?" "We want to come aboard," replied Emmanuel. "Throw us a rope that we may catch hold of." "Go round to the starboard side and you will find the gangway ladder." The sailors pulled round, and in a few seconds the two young men were going up to the ship's side. The officer of the watch came forward with an eagerness which appeared in Emmanuel's mind to promise well. "Sir," said the lieutenant to the young man, who was dressed in the same uniform as himself, and appeared to be of the same rank, "this is my friend the Count. By the by, I forgot to ask you your name." "Count Emmanuel d'Auray." "I was saying then that this is my friend the Count Emmanuel d'Auray, who anxiously desires to speak to Captain Paul. Is he on board?" "He has just this moment arrived," replied the officer. "In that case, I will go below and prepare him to receive you, my dear Count. In the meantime, this is Mr. Walter, who will have the pleasure of showing you through the ship. It is an interesting sight for a land officer, and the more so as I doubt whether you would find many ships kept in such order as this one. The people are at supper right now, I believe?" "Yes, sir." "In that case, it will be a more curious sight. But," observed the officer, hesitating a little, "it is my watch on deck." "Bah! You can easily find one of your brother officers who will relieve you for a short time. I will endeavour to manage so that the captain shall not make you kick your heels too long in the ante-room. Au revoir till we meet again, Count. I shall recommend you in such a way as will ensure a good reception for you." With these words the young lieutenant disappeared down the companion ladder, while the one who remained with Emmanuel to show him around the ship took him into the 'tween decks. As the lieutenant had presumed, the crew of the frigate were at their supper. It was the first time that the Count had been present at such a repast, and however much he desired to speak immediately to the captain, he felt so curious to observe what was going on that he examined everything with eager attention. Between every 2 guns a table and benches were prepared, not standing on their feet but slung by ropes from above. 4 men were seated upon each of the benches, taking their portions of pieces of beef, which seemed to resist the actions of their knives, but which had to do with hearty fellows who did not appear at all disposed to be daunted by its toughness. At every table there were 2 cans of wine, that is to say, about a pint for each man. As to the bread, it did not appear to be distributed by rations, but they could take as much as they wanted. The most profound silence reigned throughout the crew, which was composed of more than from 180 to 200 men. Although none of those seated at the table opened their mouths for any other purpose than to eat, Emmanuel perceived with some surprise that they were composed of many different nations, which were easily discerned from the contours of their countenances. His cicerone remarked his astonishment, and replying to his thought before he had given utterance to it, said with an American accent, which Emmanuel had already observed, and which proved that he who spoke to him was born on the other side of the Atlantic, "Yes. Yes, we have a tolerably pretty sample of every nation in the world, and if all at once a great deluge should carry off the children of Noah, as it formerly did for those of Adam, our ark would furnish people who speak every language. Do you observe those 3 fellows who are exchanging a piece of roast beef for a clove of garlic? They are lads from Galicia, whom we picked up at Cape Ortelga, and who would not go into action without having said a prayer to St. Jago of Coropistello, but who, when once their prayer is over, would rather allow themselves to be cut in pieces like martyrs than retreat a single step. Those 2 who are polishing their table at the expense of their jacket sleeves are honest Dutchmen, who still complain at the injury done to their commerce by the discovery of the Cape of Good Hope. You see them, at first sight, they look like very beer pots, while those brave fellows, the moment they hear the drum beat to quarters, become as active as monkeys. Go near them, and they will talk to you about their ancestors. They will tell you they descended from those famous sweepers of the sea, who when going into action hoisted a broom instead of a flag. But they will take good care not to inform you that one fine morning the English took their broom and made rods of it. That whole table, where they are chattering together at such a rate but in an undertone, is occupied by Frenchmen, who would rather talk louder if they dared. The seat of honour is occupied by a chief elected by themselves. He is a Parisian by birth, a cosmopolite from taste, and a great master of the small sword, single stick, and a dancing master to boot. Always gay and contented, he sings when he is on duty, sings when he is fighting, and will die singing unless a hemp cravat should stop his voice, which may very well likely happen to him should he have the misfortune to fall into the hands of John Bull. Turn your eyes to the other side now, and observe that row of square and idle heads. These are strange faces to you, are they not? But which every American born between Hudson Bay and the Gulf of Mexico would recognize as once for bears born on the borders of Lake Erie or seals from Nova Scotia. There are 3 or 4 of them which are one-eyed. This arises from their peculiar mode of fighting. They twist their fingers in the hair of their antagonist and gouge out his eye with their thumbs. There are some of them who are very expert at this exercise, and who never miss their mark, so that when they are boarding a ship, they almost invariably throw away their boarding pikes or their cutlass, and seize the first Englishman they can catch hold of. They un-eye him with a dexterity and quickness quite delightful to behold. You will now comprehend that I did not deceive you in what I said, and that our collection is complete. But, asked Emmanuel, who had listened to this long enumeration with a certain degree of interest, how does your captain manage to make himself understood by men brought together from such distant nations? First of all, our captain understands all languages, and although in battle and during stormy weather he speaks his mother tongue, he gives such an accent to it that every one understands him and obeys him. But see, the larboard cabin door is opening, and instantly a boy dressed in a midshipman's uniform came up to the 2 officers, and asked Emmanuel if he did not call himself the Count d'Ore. And on his receiving an affirmative reply, he requested him to follow him. And the officer who had so conscientiously sustained the part of the cicerone immediately went back on deck to resume his duties there. As to Emmanuel, he advanced towards the cabin with a mixed feeling of anxiety and curiosity. He was at last about to be ushered into the presence of Captain Paul. He was a man who appeared to be between 50 and 55 years of age, and to whom the habit of walking between decks had given him a stoop rather than age. He wore the uniform of the French Navy according to its strictest regulations. It was a blue coat with scarlet facings, a red waistcoat, and breeches of the same colour, grey stockings with frilled shirt and ruffles. His hair, rolled up in large curls and powdered quite white, was tied into a queue by a ribbon, the ends of which floated upon his shoulders. His cocked hat and his sword were lying upon a table beside him. At the moment Emmanuel entered the door, he was sitting upon a carriage of a gun, but when he perceived him, he rose to receive him. The young Count felt intimidated by the aspect of this man. There was in his eye a searching look which appeared to peer into the very soul of the person whom he gazed upon. Perhaps, also, this impression was the more powerful, that he presented himself before him with a conscience that reproached him with the act he was endeavouring to accomplish, and of which he was about to render the captain, if not an accomplice, at all events the executioner. These 2 men, as though they felt a secret repulsion, the one toward the other, saluted each other with politeness, but with cold reserve. "Is it the Count d'Ore I have the honour of addressing?" said the old officer. "And I, Captain Paul, I believe," replied the young mouse-critter. They both bowed a second time. "May I know to what fortunate chance I owe the honour," rejoined the captain, "of a visit which is now paid to me by the heir of one of the oldest and greatest families in Brittany?" Emmanuel bowed again by way of thanks for this compliment, and then, after hesitating for a moment, as if he found it difficult to open the conversation, he observed, "I am told, Captain Paul, that you are bound to the Gulf of Mexico." "And you have not been deceived, sir. I purpose sailing for New Orleans, calling on my way to Cayenne and at the Havana. This falls out very fortunate, Captain, and you will not have to alter your course in case you should be willing to undertake the execution of the order of which I am the bearer. You have an order to communicate to me, sir, and from whom? From the Minister of Marine. An order addressed to me personally, reiterated the captain doubtingly. Not personally to you, sir, but to any captain of the Royal Navy who may be about to sail for South America. Of what nature is it, Count? A state prisoner to be transported to Cayenne. And you have the order with you? Here it is, replied Emmanuel, taking it from his pocket and presenting it to the captain. He took the paper, and going near the cabin window that he might avail himself of the last gleam of daylight, he read aloud, "The ministers of marine and of the colonies order any captain or lieutenant commanding a government vessel who may be about to sail for South America or for the Gulf of Mexico, to take on board his ship and to land at Cayenne the person named Lusignan, condemned to transportation for life. During the passage the convict shall take his meals in his own cabin and shall not be allowed to have any communication with the ship's company." "Is the order in due form?" asked Emmanuel. "Perfectly, sir," replied the captain. "And are you disposed to execute it?" "Am I not under the orders of the Ministry of Marine?" "The prisoner may then be sent to you?" "Whenever you will. But it had better be this evening or as soon as possible, as I do not expect to be long in these roads." "I will take care that due diligence shall be used. Is this all that you have to say to me?" "Nothing further, excepting to add my thanks." "Do not add anything, sir. The minister orders and I obey, that's all. It is a duty which I fulfil, and not a service that I am rendering." Upon these words the captain and the count bowed to each other and separated more coldly even than when they had met. When he reached the deck, Emmanuel asked the officer of the watch for his friend who had accompanied him on board, but was informed he had been detained by Captain Paul to sup with him, and that being anxious to oblige the count, he had placed his boat at his disposal. She was waiting alongside the ship, and the sailors were in readiness to accompany him. Emmanuel had scarcely got into her when they rowed him away with a rapidity equal to that which they had conducted him on board. But this time she proceeded in sorrowful silence, for the young lieutenant was no longer there to animate the count with his practical philosophy. That same night the prisoner was conducted on board the Indienne, and the next morning at daybreak the inquisitive inhabitants of the coast no longer discerned the frigate which had given rise to so many conjectures, and whose unexpected arrival, her remaining there without any apparent object, and her spontaneous departure, remained an inexplicable mystery to the inhabitants of Fort Louis. The gallant vessels side by side did lie, yard arm and yard arm, and the murderous guns belched forth their flames and shot, till the white decks ran like a sea with blood. Uncertain still the victory stood, till Perry, waving his bright sword o'er his head, cried, "Follow me!" 100 shouts responded to this call. Then with one spring he bounded on the decks of his determined foe. Oxford Play. As the motives which had induced Captain Paul to visit the coast of Brittany had no relation with our history, excepting as far as regards the events which we have related, we shall leave our readers in the same state of uncertainty as were the inhabitants of Fort Louis. And although our vocation and our sympathies naturally incline us to terra firma, we must follow our hero for a few days in his adventurous course upon the ocean. The weather was as beautiful as it generally is on the west coast of France at the commencement of autumn. The Indienne sailed gaily on with as much a fair wind as could blow for her. The ship's crew, excepting those actually employed in manoeuvring the vessel, were availing themselves of the fine weather and occupied in their own matters, as caprice directed them, or were idly lounging about the ship, when all at once a voice which appeared to descend from the sky called out, "Below there!" "Hallo there," replied the quartermaster, who was standing near the helm. "Sail ho!" cried the seaman, who was on the lookout at the head-mast. "Sail ho!" repeated the quartermaster. "Officer of the deck, be so good as to inform the captain there is a sail in sight." "A sail! A sail!" re-echoed the crew from different parts of the deck, for at that moment a wave having raised the vessel which appeared upon the horizon, had for an instant rendered her visible to the eyes of the ship's company. "A sail!" exclaimed a young man of 25, springing upon the quarter-deck from the cabin stairs. "Ask Mr. Arthur what he thinks of her. Masthead there," cried the lieutenant, using his speaker trumpet. "The captain wants to know, Mr. Arthur, what you make of the strange sail." Arthur, the young midshipman, had gone aloft immediately upon hearing a sail announced. He replied, "She looks like a large square-rigged vessel, close-hauled and steering for us." "Yes, yes," said the young man to whom Walter had given the title of captain. "She has a good eye, as we have, and she has seen us. Very well, if she wishes for a little chat, she will find us ready to talk to her. Besides, our guns must be almost choked for having their mouths stopped for so long." After some little time, the midshipman again hailed the officer on the deck, and told him that the strange ship had just set her mainsail, and had altered her course a little so as to cross their bow. "Sir," said the captain, addressing the lieutenant, "get ready to beat to quarters. We must prepare for this fellow. He looks rather suspicious." And then calling out to the midshipman, "How does the ship seem to sail, Mr. Arthur? What do you think of her?" "She seems to be a fast sailor and is a man of war, I should think by the squareness of her yards, and although I cannot see her flag, I would wager that she bears King George's commission." "I should not wonder," observed the captain to the first lieutenant, "and that she has orders to give chase to a certain frigate called the Indienne, and that her commander is promised good promotion should he succeed in capturing her." "Ha ha! Now she is loosing her top-gallant sails. The bloodhound has scented us, and is decidedly about to give us chase. Set our top-gallant sails too, Mr. Walter, and let us keep our course without varying a point. We shall see whether they dare to come athwart our hawsers." The captain's orders were instantly repeated to the lieutenant, and in a few minutes the ship, which had been running under her top sails, felt the influence of her top-gallant sails, heeled over under this new pressure, and bounded along as if animated by the sight of the enemy, and dashing away the spray from either bow with eager impetuosity. For some time there was hardly a word uttered on board. Everyone appeared to wait anxiously for the termination of this state of suspense. And we shall profit by this momentary quiet to call the attention of our readers to the person of the officer to whom the lieutenant had given the title of captain. It was no longer either the young or sceptical lieutenant, whom we had seen accompanying the Count d'Ore on board the ship, nor the old sea-wolf with his stooping gait and harsh and snappish answers, who had received him in the cabin. He was a handsome young man, from 20 to 25 years of age, as we have said before, who, having thrown off all disguise, appeared at length in his own person, and dressed in a fanciful uniform which he always wore when upon the wide ocean. It was a sort of grey coat of black velvet, with gold shoulder knots and fastened with hooks and eyes of the same metal. Round his waist he wore a Turkish belt, in which he placed a pair of elegant duelling pistols, richly inlaid and ornamented, apparently more for show than defence. His pantaloons were of white cashmere, with boots which reached nearly to his knees. Round his neck, a cravat of transparent Indian muslin, embroidered with flowers in their natural colours, was loosely tied. His hair, no longer disfigured by powder, and black as ebony, flowed from his cheeks, which were tanned by exposure to the sun. His eyes beamed with hope and animation. Near him, upon a gun, was placed a steel helmet, which fastened by a curved chain under the chin. This was his battle dress, and the only defensive armour which he wore. Some deep indentations in the helmet proved that it had more than once saved the head, which it had protected from those severe wounds inflicted by those terrible cutlasses used by seamen when boarding. As to the ship's company, they wore the elegant, though plain, uniform of the French Navy. During this time, the vessel which had been described by the man at the masthead, and which had then appeared like a white speck upon the horizon, had become little by little a pyramid of sails and rigging. All eyes were fixed upon her, and although no order had been actually given, every one of the crew had taken the position which individually belonged to him, as though it had been determined that a battle should take place. There reigned then on board the Indienne that solemn and profound silence which in a ship of war always preceded the decisive orders of the captain. Finally, the hull of the strange sail appeared rising out of the water, as her sails had successively done before. It was then clearly discernible that she was a larger ship than the Indienne, and that she carried 36 guns. She, however, showed no colours. As to her crew were carefully and completely concealed behind her bulwarks, it was impossible to ascertain, unless by some peculiar indications, to what nation she belonged. These two observations were made almost at the same moment by Captain Paul. The last, however, seemed to strike him the more forcibly. "It appears," said he, addressing the lieutenant, "that we are going to have a scene of a masked ball. Order Arthur to bring us a few flags, and let us prove to this unknown that the Indienne has several disguises at her disposal. And then, Mr. Walter, give orders that cutlasses and boarding pikes be distributed, for we can hardly expect in these seas to meet with any but enemy ships." The two orders were executed as soon as given. In an instant the young midshipman had brought on deck a dozen flags of different nations, and Lieutenant Walter, having had the arm chest opened, had boarding pikes piled in different positions throughout the ship, and had distributed cutlasses and axes to the ship's company. He then returned to his place by the captain's side. Every man again resumed his post by instinct rather than by order, for they had not yet beat to quarters, so that the apparent confusion which had existed for a moment ceased at once, and the frigate became once more, as it were, silent and attentive. However, the two ships, following their converging directions, continued to approach each other. When they were about the distance of 3 gunshots, "Mr. Walter," said the captain, "I think it is time we should begin to mystify our good friend here. Let us show him the old Scotch flag." The lieutenant gave a sign to the quartermaster, and the red line of Scotland on the blue field rose like a flame to the peak of the Indienne. But nothing on board the enemy's ship gave evidence of their paying the slightest attention to this manoeuvre. "Yes, yes," murmured the captain, "the 3 leopards of England have so well filed the teeth and pared the claws of the Scottish lion that they pay no attention to him, believing that he is tamed because he is defenceless. Show him some other colour, Mr. Walter, and perhaps we shall succeed in loosening his tongue. What flag should I hoist, Captain?" "Take the first one that comes. Chance may perhaps favour us." This order was scarcely given when the Scotch flag was hauled down, and that of Sardinia took its place. The ship still remained mute. "Well, well," said the captain jestingly, "it appears that His Majesty King George is on good terms with his brother of Cyprus and Jerusalem." Do not let us bring them to loggerheads by carrying our joke further, Mr. Walter. Let us show the American flag and prove that it really is the right one by firing an unshot gun. The same maneuver was repeated. The Sardinian flag was hauled down and the stars of the United States rose slowly towards the sky and were certified by firing a gun. What the captain had foreseen then happened immediately on the display of this symbol of rebellion rising instantly into the air. The unknown ship immediately betrayed its incognito by hoisting the British flag. At the same moment a cloud of smoke was seen issuing from the side of the royalist ship, and before the report was heard, a cannonball was seen tipping from wave to wave and fell about 100 yards short of the Indienne. "Beat to quarters, Mr. Walter, for you see we have guessed rightly. Come on, boys," cried he to the crew. "Hurrah for America and death to England." This was answered by a general shout, and had not ceased when they heard beating to quarters on board the Drake, for that was the name of the English ship. The drums of the Indienne immediately replied, and every man ran to his post, the gunners to their guns, the officers to their stations, and the sailors to their running rigs. As to the captain, he jumped upon the top of a companion, his speaking trumpet in his hand, the supreme symbol, the sceptre of nautical royalty which the commander always wields in the hour of combat or during the raging of the tempest. They now seemed to have made an exchange of parts, for the English apparent impatience and the Americans effective calmness. The ships were hardly within gunshot when a long line of smoke was seen issued from the side of the English vessel, and a report similar to loud thunder was heard. And the iron messengers sent to deal death among the rebels, having in their impetuosity miscalculated the distance, fell harmless before reaching the sides of the frigate. The latter, however, as if refusing to reply to so premature an attack, continued to haul to the wind, as if to spare the enemy too long a course. At this moment the captain turned, as if to give a last look round his ship, and his astonished gaze was attracted by the appearance of a new personage on the deck. Who had selected this dangerous and exciting moment to make his entrance upon the scene? It was a young man somewhere between 22 or 23 years of age. His face was pale and mild. He was plainly but elegantly dressed, and whom the captain had not before seen on board. He was leaning against the mizzen mast, his arms folded over his chest, and looking with melancholy indifference at the English vessel, which was approaching them under a heavy press of canvas. The calmness at such a moment in a man who appeared a stranger to nautical combats forcibly struck the captain. He then remembered the prisoner whom the Count d'Ori had announced to him, and who had been brought on board during the last night he had passed at the anchorage of Port Louis. "Who allowed you to come on deck, sir?" said he, softening as much as possible the tone of his inquiry, so that it would have been difficult to ascertain whether this was addressed as a mere question or as a reproach. "No one, sir," replied the prisoner, in a soft and sorrowful voice. "But I had hoped that under the present circumstances you would less severely observe the orders by which I became your prisoner. Have you forgotten that you were forbidden to hold any communication with the ship's company?" "I did not come here with the purpose of holding communication with the ship's company, sir. I came to see whether some friendly cannonball would do me a good turn." "You may but too soon have your desire accomplished if you remain where you are now standing. Therefore, believe me, you had better remain below." "Is this your advice or an order, Captain?" "You have full liberty to construe it as you please." "In that case," replied the young man, "I thank you. I will remain here." At this instant, another loud report was heard, but the two ships by this time neared each other so much that they were within gunshot, and the whole tempest of shot passed through the sails of the Indienne. Two splinters fell from the masts, and the groans and stifled cries of some of the ship's company were heard. The captain, at that moment, had his eyes fixed upon the prisoner, above whose head a cannonball had passed within 2 feet, grazing the mizzen-mast against which he was leaning. But notwithstanding his death warning, he remained calm and unmoved, in the same attitude as if he had not felt the wings of the exterminating angel waft above his head. The captain knew how to appreciate courage. This incident was sufficient to assure him of the undoubted bravery of the man who stood before him. "'Tis well, sir," said he to him. "Remain where you are, and when we come to boarding, if you should be tired of remaining with your arms crossed, take up a cutlass or an axe and give us a helping hand. You will excuse me not paying you more attention at this point, for I have other things to do." "Fire!" cried he in a voice of thunder through his speaking trumpet. "Now give it to her! Fire!" "Fire!" repeated the officers like an echo at their different stations. At the instant, the Indienne trembled from a keel to a royal masthead as she poured her broadside into the enemy. A cloud of smoke spread itself like a veil along the starboard side, which was soon carried to leeward. The captain, standing upon the companion, impatiently awaiting its clearing off, that he might ascertain the effect which the broadside had produced upon the enemy's vessel. When his gaze could penetrate through the smoke, he perceived that the enemy's main-top-mast had fallen, and had, with its sails, encumbered the after part of the Drake's deck, and that her other sails were cut to ribbons. Then putting his speaker-trumpet to his mouth, he cried, "Well done, my lads! Now watch her closely. They will be too busy in clearing away the wreck of their mast to think of raking us. Fire as you can, and this time shave close." The crew hastened to obey this order. The frigate veered round, and as the guns were brought to bear upon the enemy, they were discharged with terrible effect, and as the captain had imagined, without any hindrance from the Drake. The Indienne once more trembled like a volcano, and as a volcano vomited forth her flame and smoke. This time the gunners had followed the orders of their captain to the letter, and the broadside had been fired point-blank, striking the hull and the lower masts. Both her masts were still standing, but on all sides the sails were hanging in tatters. It appeared that some more considerable damage had been done, which it was impossible to ascertain at that distance. For some time the broadside was not returned. At length it was, and instead of raking the Indienne, it struck her in a diagonal direction. It was not the less terrible, for it swept off many a brave fellow from the deck, but by a chance which appeared positively magical, touched neither of the masts. At one glance, Paul ascertained that he had only lost some men. His heart bounded with joy. He once more placed the speaking trumpet to his mouth. "Larboard the helm," cried he, "and board her on the larboard side. Boarders to your stations. Be ready. Give her one more broadside." At the first movement of the Indienne, the enemy at once perceived the intention and endeavoured to neutralize it by its similar movement. But at the instant of attempting to execute it, a dreadful crash was heard on board her, and the mainmast, which had been nearly cut through by the last discharge from the Indienne, trembled for a few seconds like an uprooted tree and fell forward, covering the deck with the mainsail and the rigging. Captain Paul at once comprehended what had delayed the return of the broadside. "Now she is ours, my lads," cried he. "We have only to take her. One last broadside within pistol shot, and then we'll board her." The Indienne obeyed her helm as does a well-trained horse the bridle, and unopposed advanced towards her enemy, for the latter had no steering way upon her, and her guns were consequently useless. The Drake was therefore at the mercy of her adversary, who, by remaining at a distance and playing at long bowls, might have riddled her and sunk her. But disdaining this too easy victory, sent in a last broadside, and then, before seeing the effects it had produced, the frigate ran in upon her larboard quarter and threw her grappling irons on board. On the instant, the tops and forecastle of the Indienne blazed as with fireworks on a holiday, and flaming grenades were showered upon the deck of the Drake with the rapidity of hailstones.
"Courage, my lads, courage! Lash the bowsprit to her quarter rails. Well done! Now, to your two forecastle carronades, fire!"
All these orders were executed with magical celerity, and the two ships were as securely lashed together as if by iron chains. The two carronades, which had not been fired during the combat, thundered in their turn, and swept the enemy deck with a cloud of grape shot. And then another cry was heard, uttered by the same stentorian voice, "Now board her!" And adding example to precept, the captain of the Indienne threw aside his speaking trumpet, now of no longer use, placed his helmet on his head, fastening the clamp beneath his chin, placed the sabre, which he usually wore in his belt, beneath his teeth, and rushed upon the bowsprit to jump thence upon the deck of the enemy. Although this movement followed the order he had given with such great rapidity as the thunder succeeds the lightning, he was only the second upon the English deck. He was preceded by the young prisoner with whom he had conversed, who had thrown aside his coat and, armed only with a hatchet, was the first to encounter death or victory. "You are not conversant with the discipline of my ship," said Paul, laughing. "It is my place to be the first to board a ship I am attacking. I forgive you this time, but take care it does not happen again."
At the same instant, the seamen of the Indiana rushed from their own ship to the enemy's, taking advantage of every point of contact, some from the bowsprit, others from the end of the yards and nettings, and fell upon the deck like ripe fruit falling from a tree when shaken by the wind. Then the English, who had retreated to their forecastle, unmasked a carronade, which they had had time to turn upon their enemy.
A volley of fire and iron was vomited forth on the assailants. 1/4 of the crew of the Indienne fell killed or mutilated on the enemy's deck, in the midst of cries and maledictions. But above the cries and blasphemous oaths, a voice resounded, crying, "Forward, all of you!" Then ensued a scene of appalling confusion, a combat hand to hand, a general duel. To the roar of cannon, to the report of musketry, to the explosion of hand grenades, had succeeded the struggle with cold steel, less noisy, but more sure, above all with seamen, who had retained for their sole use this inheritance from the giants, prescribed for more than 2 centuries on the field of battle. It was with hatchets that they cleaved at each other's skulls. It was with cutlasses that they wounded each other's breasts. It was with boarding pikes that they nailed each other to the deck and masts. From time to time, in the midst of this mute carnage, a stray pistol shot was heard, but isolated, as if ashamed of taking part in such a butchery. It lasted nearly 1/4 of an hour, and amidst a confusion it would be impossible to describe. And then the British flag was lowered, and the crew of the Drake being driven below. There remained on deck only the conquerors, the wounded and the dead, in the midst of whom was the captain of the Indienne, surrounded by his crew with his foot upon the breast of the captain of the enemy's ship, having on his right his first lieutenant Walter, and on his left his young prisoner, whose shirt, steeped in blood, witnessed the share he had had in the victory. "Now all is over," said Paul, stretching out his hand, "and he who strikes another blow will have me to deal with." Then holding out his hand to his young prisoner, "Sir," he said, "you will relate to me tonight how it was that you were made my prisoner, will you not? For there must be some cowardly machination in this affair. The infamous only are transported to Caen, and you are too brave to be infamous." She was a woman of virtue most austere, noble in birth, and of most royal presence. But sad thoughts seemed to possess her wholly. Her children even seldom approached her, and when they did, no soft affection, motherly caress, were e'er accorded to them. Stern and cold, she looked a moving statue. Old Play. About 6 months after the occurrence of the events we have just related, and in the early part of the spring of 1780, a post-chaise, whose wheels and panels, covered with mud and dust, clearly certified that it had performed a long journey, was dragging slowly along, although 2 powerful horses were harnessed to it, upon the road between Vannes and Auray. The traveller it contained, and who was roughly jolted in traversing the crossroads, was our former acquaintance Count Emmanuel, whom we saw open the scene upon the jetty at Fort Louis. He was coming from Paris with all haste and proceeding to his ancient family mansion, with regards to which it is now necessary to give some more precise and circumstantial details. Count Emmanuel d'Auray was descended from one of the oldest families in Brittany. One of his ancestors had followed St. Louis to the Holy Land, and from that time the name, of which he was the last inheritor, had been constantly blended with the history of our monarchy, whether in its victories or defeat. His father, the Marquis of d'Auray, Chevalier of the Order of St. Louis, Commander of the Order of St. Michael, and Grand Cross of the Order of the Holy Ghost, enjoyed at the court of Louis XV, in which he filled the post of High Steward, that high distinction to which his birth, his fortune, and his personal merit truly entitled him. His influence there had been increased by his marriage with Madame de Sable, who was his equal in everything that regarded family or credit at court, so that a brilliant future was open to the ambition of the young people, when, after being married 5 years, a report was suddenly spread about the court that the Marquis d'Auray had become insane during a journey he made to his estates. This report was for a long time disbelieved. At length the winter arrived, and neither the Marquis nor his wife made the appearance at Versailles. His place was kept open for him another year by the king, still hoping he would regain reason, refused to appoint a successor to it. But a second winter passed on, and even the Marchioness did not return to pay her court to the Queen. In France, people are soon forgotten. Absence is a wearying malady to which even the greatest names sooner or later must succumb. The shroud of indifference was gradually spread over this family, immersed in their old chateau, as in a tomb, and whose voices were not heard either soliciting or complaining. Genealogists alone had duly enregistered the birth of a son and daughter, the only fruits of this union, the d'Aurays. Therefore, continuing to figure among the names of the French nobility, but not having mixed themselves up for more than 20 years, either in court intrigues or in political affairs, not having sided either with the Pompadour or a Dubarry, not having distinguished themselves in the victories of the Maréchal or de Broglie, or in the defeats of the Count Clement. In short, having neither sound nor echo, they had been completely forgotten. However, the ancient name of the Lords of d'Auray had been twice pronounced at court, but without producing any impression. The first time on the occasion of the young Count Emmanuel's being admitted in 1769 as one of the pages to Louis XV, and the second when, after having served his time as page, he entered the company of mousequitters of the young King Louis XVI. He had, during this time, become acquainted with the Baron de Lector, a distant relation of Marquis de Maripaz, who was favourably disposed towards him, and who enjoyed a considerable degree of influence with that minister. Emmanuel had been presented to his old courtier, who, having been informed that the Count d'Auray had a sister, one day let fall a few words upon the possibility of a union between the two families. Emmanuel, young and full of ambition, wearied with struggling beneath the veil which had obscured his family name, saw in this marriage a means of regaining the position which his father had occupied at court under the late king, and had eagerly caught at the first overtures for this alliance. M. de Lector, on his side, under the pretext of uniting himself still closer by the bands of brotherhood to his young friend, had urged his suit with an eagerness which was so much more the flattering to Emmanuel that the man who demanded the hand of his sister had never seen her. The Marchioness d'Ore had listened the more readily to this proposal, as it opened to her son the road to royal favour, and the marriage was agreed upon, if not between the two young people, at all events between the families. Emmanuel, who preceded M. de Lector 3 or 4 days only, had hastened into the country to inform his mother that everything had been arranged according to her desire. As to Marguerite, the intended wife, they contented themselves with informing her of the resolution they had taken without thinking it necessary to ask for her consent to it, in about the same way that a criminal is informed of the sentence which condemns him to the scaffold. It was, therefore, thus cradling himself in the brilliant dreams of future exalted favour, and buoying himself up with the most elevated projects of ambition, that young Count Emmanuel re-entered the gloomy castle of his family, whose feudal towers, black walls, and courtyards, overgrown with grass, formed so striking a contrast with the golden hopes that agitated him. The castle was a league and a half distance from any other dwelling. The principal facade overlooked that part of the ocean which, being so constantly swept by storms, had obtained the name of the Wild Sea. The other looked towards an immense park, which, being for 20 years abandoned and uncultivated, had become a complete forest. As to the apartments, they had remained constantly closed with the exception of those inhabited by the family. The furniture, which had been renewed during the reign of Louis XIV, had, thanks to the care of numerous household, retained a rich and aristocratic appearance, which the more modern part of it had begun to lose, and which, although more elegant, was less magnificent. It had been supplied from the workshops of Bowley, the appointed upholsterers of the court. It was into one of these rooms, with deep mouldings, sculptured chimney-pieces, and ceilings painted in fresco, that the Count Emmanuel was ushered on alighting from his carriage. He was in such haste to communicate to his mother the happy news of which he was the bearer, that without taking the time to change his dress, he threw his hat, his gloves, and his travelling pistols on the table, and ordered an old servant to inform the Marchioness of his arrival, and to ask her permission to present himself, saying that he would await it in that room. For such, in this old family, was a respect paid to parents that the son, after an absence of 5 months, did not dare to present himself to his mother without in the first place consulting her desires upon the subject. As to the Marquis d'Ore, his children could not remember having seen him more than 2 or 3 times, and then it was by stealth. For his insanity was of a nature, it was said, that certain objects irritated, and they had been always kept from him with the greatest precaution. The Marchioness alone, a model of conjugal virtue, remained always with him, fulfilling toward the poor lunatic not only the duties of a wife, but also those of a servant. Consequently, her name was revered in the surrounding villages as that of a saint, whose devotedness on earth had gained a place in heaven. In a few moments the old servant returned and announced that the Marchioness d'Ore preferred coming down to him, and begged that the Count should wait for her in the room in which he then was. Almost immediately afterwards, the door of the room again opened, and Emmanuel's mother entered it. She was about 40 or 45 years of age, tall and pale, but still handsome, whose calm, austere, and melancholy features had a singular appearance of haughtiness, energy, and command. She was in costume of a widow, as adopted in 1760, for since the time that her husband had lost his reason, she had never laid aside her mourning garments. Her long black gown gave to her movements, cold and slow of those of a shadow, a solemn appearance, which shed around this extraordinary woman a feeling of awe which even filial affection had never been able to surmount. Therefore, on seeing her, Emmanuel started, as at the sight of an unexpected apparition, and instantly rising, he advanced 3 steps towards her, respectfully went down upon one knee, and kissed the hand she presented to him. "Rise, sir," said the Marchioness. "I am happy to see you again." And she pronounced these words with as little emotion as if her son, who had been absent 5 months, had left her but the day before. Emmanuel obeyed, conducted his mother to a large armchair, in which she seated herself, and he remained standing before her. "I received your letter, Count," she said, "and I congratulate you on your skill. You appeared to me born for diplomacy, and even more so than a military life. You ought to request the Baron de Lector to obtain an embassy for you, rather than a regiment. Lector is ready to solicit anything we may desire, madam, and what is more, he will obtain anything we may solicit. So great is his power with Den Maurepas, and so great is his love for my sister, in love with a woman he has never seen. Lector is a gentleman, madam, and the portrait I have drawn of Marguerite, and perhaps the information he has received as to our fortune, has inspired him with a most earnest desire to become your son and to call himself my brother, and therefore he has requested that all the preliminary ceremonies may be gone through in his absence. You have obtained the publication of the banns, madam? Yes. The day after tomorrow, then, the marriage contract can be signed. With the help of God, all will be ready. Thanks, madam. But tell me, continued the Marchioness, leaning on the arm of her chair and bending towards Emmanuel, has he not questioned you regarding that young man for whom he obtained from the minister an order of deportation? By no means, my mother. These are services which are asked without entering into any explanation, and which are granted in explicit confidence. It is well understood between people who know the world that they are to be forgotten as soon as rendered. Then he knows nothing? No. But did he know all? Well? Well, madam, I believe he is so much of a philosopher that the discovery would not in any way influence his determination. I thought as much. He is a ruined spendthrift, replied the Marchioness, with an indescribable expression of contempt, and as if speaking to herself. But supposing it should be so, said Emmanuel anxiously, your resolution would still be unchanged, I hope. Are we not rich enough to repair this fortune, if he can restore our former influence? Then there is only my sister. Do you doubt that she will obey me when I inform her of my will? Can you believe, then, that she has forgotten Lusignan? For 7 months, at least, she has not dared to remember him in my presence. Reflect, my mother, that this marriage is the only means by which our family can be restored to influence. For there is one thing I must not conceal from you. My father has been ill for 15 years, and having been absent from court so long, was completely forgotten by the old king at his death, and by the young king on his accession to the throne. Your virtuous attention to the Marquis has not permitted you to leave him, even for a moment, since the hour in which he was deprived of reason. Your virtues, madam, are of that nature which God sees and recompenses, but of which the world remains ignorant. And while you are fulfilling, in this old forgotten castle at Brittany, the holy and consolatory mission, which you call a duty, your former friends disappear, they die, or they forget you. This is a painful truth to people who, like us, can count 600 years of illustrious nobility. For when I reappeared at court, our name, the name of the family Diore, was hardly known to their majesties, but as a historical recollection. Yes, I know full well that kings have but short memories, murmured the Marchioness. But instantly, as if reproaching herself for such a blasphemy, she rejoined, "And I hope that the blessings of God may always attend their majesties and France." "And what can in any way affect their happiness?" replied Emmanuel, with that perfect confidence in the future, which in those days was a distinct characteristic of the harebrained and unthinking nobility. "Louis XVI is young and good, Marie Antoinette young and lovely, both of them beloved by a brave and loyal people. Fate has placed them, heaven has praised them, beyond the reach of every evil." "No one, my son," replied the Marchioness, mournfully shaking her head, "believe me, is placed beyond the reach of human woes and human frailty. No heart, however confident its owners may believe that he can master it, firm as it may be, is proof against the passions, and no head, were it even a crowned one, may be blanched in a single night. The people, you say, are brave and loyal." The Marchioness arose and slowly advanced to the window, and with a solemn gesture pointed to the ocean. "Observe that sea. It is now calm and peaceful, and yet tomorrow, this night, or in an hour perhaps, the breath of the tempest may bear us the cries and distress of unhappy beings it is about to engulf. Although I am separated from the world, strange reports sometimes reach my ears, borne as it were by invisible and prophetic spirits. Does there not exist a sect of philosophers which have led away men of high name by the errors which it propagates? Do they not speak of a whole world which has detached itself from the mother country, whose children refuse to acknowledge their father? Is there not a people who style themselves a nation? Have I not heard it said that men of high birth have crossed the ocean to offer to rebels swords which their ancestors never drew but at the call of their legitimate sovereigns? And have I not been told, moreover, or is it but the dream of my solitude, that King Louis XVI and the Queen Marie Antoinette herself, forgetting that sovereigns are a family of brothers, have authorized these armed immigrations, and have given letters of marque to I know not what foreign pirate?" "All this is true," said Emmanuel, much astonished. "May God, then, watch over their majesties the King and Queen of France," rejoiced the Marchioness, as she slowly retired from the room, leaving Emmanuel so astounded at these painful forebodings that he saw her withdraw without uttering a word or even making a gesture to retain her. Emmanuel remained for some time pensive and serious, but soon his buoyant character surmounted those gloomy presages, and as if thinking to change his ideas by changing the view he had seen gazing at, he left the window, which opened towards the sea, and crossed the room to another, whence he could discern the whole of the plain which extended itself between Diore and Venice. He had been there but a few minutes when he perceived two persons on horseback following the same road he had just travelled over, and who appeared to be approaching the castle. As they drew nearer, he could distinguish that there were a gentleman and his servant. The first, dressed in the costume of young men of fashion of that day, that is to say, in a short green riding coat with gold frogs, stocking-knit breeches and top boots, wearing a round hat with a broad brim, and his hair tied with a large bow of ribbons. He was mounted on an English horse of rare beauty and great value, which he managed with a grace that proved he had made equestrian exercises a profound study. He was followed at a short distance by a servant whose aristocratic livery was in perfect harmony with the lordly air of the person whom he served. Emmanuel imagined for a moment, on seeing them proceeding so directly towards the castle, that it was the Baron d'Elector, who, having hastened his departure from Paris, intended to surprise him. But he soon found that he was mistaken, and although it appeared to him that it was not the first time he had seen the horseman, he could not recollect where or under what circumstances he had met him. While he was racking his memory to discover the event in his life with which this vague remembrance was connected, the strangers had disappeared behind an angle of the castle wall. 5 minutes afterwards, Emmanuel heard the sound of their horses' feet in the courtyard, and almost immediately the doors were opened. A service announced, "Mr. Paul." Women's love, once given, may break the heart that holds, but never melts into air saved with a latest sigh. Bulwer, the Sea Captain. The name, as well as the appearance of the person thus announced, awakened in their turn in the mind of Emmanuel a confused recollection of which he could not have fixed either date or event. The person, preceded by the servant, entered the room by a door opposite the one through which the Marchioness had retired. Although the moment was ill-timed for a visit, and though the young Count, preoccupied by his projects for the future, would have preferred meditating upon and ripening them, he was compelled by the rules of etiquette, so severe in those days between well-bred people, to receive the visitor with courtesy and politeness. The deportment of the latter bespoke the man of distinction. After the usual salutations, Emmanuel by a gesture invited the stranger to be seated, who bowed and took a chair, and then the conversation commenced with some commonplace, polite observation. "I am delighted to meet you, Count," said the stranger. "Chance has favoured me, sir," replied Emmanuel. "An hour sooner you would not have found me here. I have just arrived from Paris." "I am aware of that, Count, for we have been travelling the same road. I set out an hour after you, and all along the road I heard of you by means of the postilions who had the honour of driving you." "May I be bold enough to ask," said Emmanuel, in a tone which began to evict a certain degree of dissatisfaction, "to what circumstance I owe the interest you appear to evict concerning me?" "This interest is perfectly natural between old acquaintance, and perhaps I might have reason to complain that it does not appear to be reciprocal." "In fact, sir, it does appear to me," replied Emmanuel, "that I have met you somewhere, but my recollection serves me but confusedly. Will you be kind enough to assist me?" "If what you say be the case, Count, your memory must indeed be rather fugitive, for within the last 6 months, on 3 separate occasions, I have the honour of exchanging compliments with you." "Even should I expose myself to further reproach, I am compelled to say that I still remain in the same state of uncertainty with regard to your person. Pray, therefore, have the goodness to fix my memory, by aid of more precise dates, on some event, and remind me under what circumstances I had the honour of meeting you for the first time." "The first time, Count, it was on the jetty of Port Louis. You desired to obtain some information with regard to a certain frigate, which I was so fortunate to be able to furnish you. I believe even that I accompanied you on board. Upon that occasion I wore the uniform of a lieutenant of the Royal Navy, and you that of a mouse-critter." "I now well recollect it, sir, and I was obliged to leave the vessel without offering the thanks I owed you." "You are mistaken, Count. I received those thanks during our second interview." "And where did that take place?" "On board the very vessel to which I had conducted you, in the cabin. I then wore the uniform of the captain of the ship, blue coat, red waistcoat and breeches, with grey stockings, a 3-cornered hat, and curled hair. Only the captain appeared to you some 30 years older than the lieutenant, and it was not without motive that I had made myself appear so much older, for you would perhaps not have chosen to confide to a young man a secret of such importance as you then communicated to me." "What you now say is incredible, sir, and yet something tells me that it was really so. Yes, I now remember that in the shade, in which you remained half concealed, I saw eyes sparkling similar to yours. I have not forgotten them. But this was only the time before the last, you say, that I had the honour of seeing you. Continue, sir, I beg, to assist my memory, for I cannot recall our third interview. The last, Count, was only a week since, at Paris, at a fencing match at St. George's at the Rue Chanteussin. You remember, do you not, an English gentleman with his hair so red that his powder could scarcely conceal its brilliant colour? A scarlet coat and tightly fitting pantaloons. I even had the honour of trying a bout with you, and I was fortunate enough to hit you 3 times, while on the contrary, you were not lucky enough to touch me once. On that occasion I called myself Jones. It is most singular. It was certainly the same look, but it could not be the same man. The will of God has directed that the look should be the only thing which cannot be disguised, and this is why he has thrown into the look a spark of his own light. Well then, the lieutenant, the captain, the Englishman were one of the same person. At the present moment, sir, what are you, if you please? For a man who can so perfectly disguise himself, that question, you must admit, is not altogether unnecessary. At the present moment, Count, as you see, I have no motive for concealment, and therefore I have come to you in the simple costume of the young nobility when they visit each other as neighbours in the country. I am whatever you may please to consider me, French, English, Spanish, or even an American. In which of these languages would you wish our conversation to be continued? Although some of these languages may be as familiar to me as they are to you, sir, I prefer the French language. It is that of a plain and concise explanations. Be it so, replied Paul, with an expression of profound melancholy. The French is also the language I prefer. I first saw the day upon French ground, for the sun of France was that which gladdened my eyes, and although I have often seen more fertile climes and a more brilliant sun, there has never been for me but one country and one sun, the son of the country of Franco. Your national enthusiasm, said Emmanuel, interrupting him ironically, cause you to forget the motive to which I am indebted for the honour of this visit. You are right, sir, and I will return to it. It was then, about 6 months ago, while walking on the jetty of Port Louis, you saw in the outer roads a fine sharp frigate, with tall masts and square yards, and you said to yourself, the captain of that ship must have some motive known only to himself for carrying so much canvas on masts so slight, and from that sprung to your mind that he must be some buccaneer, a pirate, a corsair. And was I mistaken? I thought I had already expressed to you, Count, replied Paul, with a slight tone of irony, my admiration and my perspicacity with which, at the first glance, you sound the depths of men and circumstances. A truce to compliments, if you please, sir, and let us to facts. It was under this persuasion that you caused yourself to be conducted on board the frigate by a certain lieutenant, and that you found a certain captain in the cabin. You were the bearer of a letter from the Minister of Marine, ordering any officer, upon your requisition, and whose ship was under the French flag and bound for the Gulf of Mexico, to conduct to Cayenne a person named Lusignan, guilty of a crime against the state. That is true. I obeyed that order, for I was then ignorant that this great culprit thus transported had committed no other crime than that of being the lover of your sister. Sir, cried Emmanuel, starting up. These are very fine pistols, Count, carelessly continued Paul, playing with the weapons which the Count d'Ori had placed upon the table on enlightening from his carriage. And they are ready loaded, said Emmanuel, in a tone which was not to be mistaken. Are they so? Returned Paul with affected indifference. That is a matter of which you can assure yourself, if you will take a turn in the park with me. "There is no necessity for going out to do that," replied Paul, without pretending to understand Emmanuel's proposal in the sense which he meant to give it. "Here is a mark, which is well placed and at a proper distance." Saying these words, the captain cocked the pistol and pointed it through the open window towards the top of a small tree. A goldfinch was rocking itself on the highest branch, singing forth its shrill and joyful notes. Paul fired, and the poor bird, cut in two, fell at the foot of the tree. Paul coolly replaced the pistol on the table. "You were perfectly right, Count," he said. "They are excellent weapons, and I advise you not to part with them." "You have just given me an extraordinary proof of it," replied Emmanuel, "and I feel bound to acknowledge that you have a steady hand." "There is nothing extraordinary in that," rejoined Paul, in that melancholy tone which was peculiar to him. "During those long days when not a breath passes over the mirror of the Supreme Being, which is called the ocean, we seamen are compelled to seek for amusement to which you landsmen are daily accustomed. Then we try our skill upon the seagulls, which hover over the crest of the wave, or the fish-hawks, which dart down upon the impudent tenant of the deep that rises to its surface, or, again, upon the swallows, which, fatigued by a long flight, alight upon the royal masthead, or on the yards or rigging. It is thus, Count, that we acquire some dexterity in exercises which may appear so incompatible with our profession." "Go on, sir, and if it be possible, let us return to the subject of our conversation." "He was a handsome, brave young man, this Lusignan. He related his whole history to me. That being the son of an old friend of your father's, who had died poor, he had been adopted by him for some 2 years before the unknown accident occurred which deprived him of his reason. That having been brought up with you, he had inspired your hatred, your sister with affection. He told me that during the long years they passed together in the same solitude, they never perceived the isolation from the world in which they lived, except when they were absent from each other. He recounted to me all the details of their youthful love, and how Marguerite had one day said to him in the words of the tender maiden of Verona, 'I will be thine, or else I'll be the tomb's.' She has but truly kept her word, yes, has she not? And you virtuous people call that shame and dishonour, when a poor child, lost through her own innocence, is carried away by love. Your mother, whose duties estranged her from her daughter and perpetually confined her to your father's room, for I know the virtues of your mother, sir, as well as I know your sister's weakness. She is an austere woman, more severe than one of God's creatures ought to be, whose only advantage over others is that of never having fallen. Your mother, I say, one night heard some stifled cry. She entered your sister's chamber, walked pale and silently up to her bed, and coldly snatched from her arms a child which had just been born, and left the room without addressing even a reproach to her daughter, but only paler and more silent than when she entered it. As to poor Marguerite, she did not utter even a cry. She made no complaint. She had fainted away immediately on perceiving her mother. Was it so, sir? Have I been rightly informed? And is the whole of this dreadful story true?" "You seem to be acquainted with every detail of it," exclaimed Emmanuel with amazement. "It is because the whole of these details are given in these letters signed by your sister," replied Paul, opening the pocket-book, "and which Lusignan, at the time he was about to be thrown amid robbers and assassins through your instrumentality, confided to me that I might restore them to her who had written them." "Give them to me, then," said Emmanuel, stretching forth his hand toward the pocket-book, "and they shall be faithfully delivered to her who has had the impudence to complain to the only person who loved her in this world. Is it not?" said Paul, withdrawing the letters and the pocket-book. "Imprudent daughter, whose own mother snatched the child from her heart. and who poured her bitter tears into the bosom of the father of her child. Imprudent sister who, not finding any protection from this tyranny in her brother, has compromised his noble name by signing with the name he bears letters which in the stupid and prejudiced eye of the world may, how is it you term this in your noble class, dishonour her family, is it not? Then cried Emmanuel, reddening with impatience, since you are aware of the terrible tendencies of these papers, fulfil the mission which you have been charged by delivering them either to me, to my mother, or to my sister. This was my intention when I landed on Lorient, but about 10 or 12 days ago, on entering a church— A church? Yes, sir. And for what purpose? To pray there. Ah, Captain Paul believes in God then. Did I not believe in him, whom should I invoke during the raging of the tempest? And in this church then? In that church, sir, I heard a priest announce the approaching marriage of the noble Marguerite d'Ore with the very high and very important Baron d'Elector. I immediately inquired for you, and was informed you were in Paris, where I was myself compelled to go to give an account of my mission to the king. To the king? Yes, sir, to the king, Louis XVI, to his Majesty in person. I immediately set out, intending to return here as soon as you did. I met you in St. George's rooms and was informed of your approaching departure. I arranged mine in consequence in order that we might arrive here at about the same time, and here I am, sir, with a very different resolution to that I had formed before landing in Britain. And what is this new destination? Let me hear it, for we must come to some conclusion. Well then, I think that as all the world and even his mother seem to have forgotten the poor orphan, it is highly necessary that I should remember it. In the position in which you are placed, sir, and with the disposition you have evinced in becoming allied to the Baron d'Elector, who in your view is the only person who can assist the realization of your ambitious projects, these letters are well worth 100,000 francs, are they not? And will make but a very trifling breach in the income of 200,000 francs which your estate affords you. But who will prove to me that this 100,000 francs— You are right, sir, and therefore it will be in exchange for a contract for an annuity upon the young Hector de Lusignan that I will deliver up these letters. Is that all, sir? I will also ask that the child be confined to me, and I will have him brought up, thanks to this little fortune, far from the mother who has forgotten him, and far from his father whom you have caused to be banished. 'Tis well, sir. I had known that it was for so small a sum and so trifling an interest that you had come, I should have not experienced so much anxiety. You will, however, permit me to speak to my mother on the subject. Monsieur le Comte, said a servant, opening the door. I am not at home to anyone. Leave the room, replied Emmanuel immediately. It is your sister, sir, who wished to see you. Tell her to come by and by. She desires to speak to you this instant. Do not put yourself out in the way of my account, said Paul. But my sister must not see you, sir. You comprehend? It is important that she does not see you. As you please, but as it is important also that I should not leave the castle before concluding the affair which brought me here, permit me to go into this side room. That will do, said Emmanuel, himself opening the door, but be quick, I beg of you. Paul went into the small room, and Emmanuel hastily closed the door upon him, which was hardly done when Marguerite appeared. Look kindly on them, I cannot bear severity. My heart so tender, should you charge me rough, I should but weep and answer you with sobbing. But use me gently, like a loving brother, and search through all the secrets of my soul. Otway. Marguerite d'Ore, whose history the reader has become acquainted with from the conversation between Captain Paul and Emmanuel, was one of those delicate pale beauties who bear impressioned upon their features the characteristic stamp of high birth. At the first glance, from the soft flexibility of her form, the whiteness of her skin, the shape of her hands and tapered fingers, with their thin, rosy and transparent nails, could be discerned that she was descendant from an ancient race. It was evident that her feet, so small that both of them could have been placed in the footmark of most women, had never walked excepting on carpeted saloons or on the flowery turf of a park. There was in her movements, graceful as they were, a certain degree of haughtiness and pride, the attribute of all her family. In fine, she conveyed the impression that her soul, capable of making any sacrifice she had resolved upon, was very likely to rebel against tyranny. That devotedness was an instinctive virtue of her heart, while obedience, in her view, was only an educational duty, so that the tempest wind which blew upon her might make her bend down before it as a lily, but not as a reed. And yet, when she appeared at the door, her features depicted such complete discouragement, her eyes had retained the traces of such burning tears, her whole frame seemed weighed down by so much an overwhelming despair, that Emmanuel saw at once that she must have summoned all her strength to assume an appearance of calmness. On seeing him, she made a violent effort, and it was within a certain degree of nervous firmness that she approached the armchair in which he was sitting. And then, seeing that the features of her brother retained the expression of impatience, which they had assumed on being interrupted, she paused, and these two children of the same mother looked at each other as strangers, the one with the eyes of ambition, the other with those of fear. By degrees, Marguerite resumed her courage. "You have come at last, Emmanuel. I was awaiting your return as the blind await the light. And yet from the manner in which you look upon your sister, it is easy to perceive that she was wrong in placing her hopes in you." "If my sister has become, as she always ought to have been," replied Emmanuel, "that is to say, a submissive and respectful daughter, she will have understood what her rank and position demand of her. She will have forgotten past events of things which never should have happened, and which consequently she ought not to remember, and she will have prepared herself for the new destiny which awaits her. If it is in this disposition that she now comes before me, my arms are open to receive her, and my sister is still my sister." "Listen attentively to what I am about to say," said Marguerite, "and above all, consider it as a justification of myself, and not intended as a reproach to others. If my mother, and God forbid that I should accuse her, for a holy duty keeps her apart from us, if my mother had been, I was about to say, towards me as other mothers are towards their daughters, I should constantly have opened my heart to her as a book. At the first word traced upon it by any stranger hand, she would have warned me of my danger, and I should have avoided it. Had I been educated in the world instead of being brought up like a poor wild flower beneath the shade of this old castle, I should have learnt from infancy the value of the rank and position which you speak of today, and I should, perhaps, not have infringed the decorum they prescribe, or the duties they impose. In short, had I been tutored amidst women of the world, with their sparkling wit and frivolous hearts, whom I have so often heard you praise, but whom I never knew, had I been guilty of some faults from levity which love had caused me to commit, yes, I can well understand. I might then have forgotten the past, have sown upon the surface new recollections as flowers are planted upon tombs, and then forgetting the place where they were grown, have formed of them a bouquet for a ball or a bridal wreath. But unfortunately it was not so, Emmanuel. I was told to beware when it was too late to avoid the danger. They spoke to me of my rank and my position in society when I had already forfeited them. And I am now called upon to look forward to joy in the future when my heart is drowning in tears and misery of the past. And the conclusion of all this, bitterly rejoined Emmanuel, The conclusion depends on you alone, Emmanuel. It is in your power to render it, if not happy, at all events becoming. I cannot have recourse to my father, alas. I know not even if he could recognize his daughter. I have no hope in my mother. Her glance freezes me. Her words are death to me. You alone, Emmanuel, were left to me, to whom I could say, Brother, you are now the head of the family. It is in you and you alone that we are answerable for our honour. I have fallen from ignorance, and I have been punished for my fault as if it had been a wilful crime. Well, well, murmured Emmanuel impatiently, what is it that you ask? Brother, I demand, since a union with the only being I could have loved is said to be impossible, I demand that my punishment be regulated according to my strength to bear it. My mother, may heaven pardon her, tore my child from me, as if she had never herself been a mother, and my child will be brought up far from me, neglected and in obscurity. You, Emmanuel, removed the father, as my mother did the child, and you were more cruel to him than the case required. I will not say as man to man, but even as a judge towards a guilty person. As to myself, you have both united to impose upon me a martyrdom more painful still. Well, then, Emmanuel, I demand, in the name of our childhood, spent in the same cradle, of our youth passed under the same roof, in the name of the tender appellations of brother and sister, which nature bestowed upon us, I demand that a convent be opened to me, and that its gates should close upon me for ever. And in that convent, I swear to you, Emmanuel, that every day upon my knees before God, my forehead bent down to the stone pavement, weighed down by my fault, I will entreat the Lord as a recompense for all my sufferings, to restore my father to reason, my mother to happiness, and to pour on you, Emmanuel, honour and glory and fortune. I swear to you I will do this. Yes, and the world will say that I had a sister whom I sacrificed to my fortune, whose property I inherited while she still lived. Why, this is sheer madness. Listen to me, Emmanuel, rejoined Marguerite, supporting herself on the back of a chair near to where she was standing. Well, replied Emmanuel, when you have pledged your word, you keep it, do you not? I am a gentleman. Well then, look at this bracelet. I see it, perfectly. What then? It is fastened by a key. The key which opens it is attached to a ring, and with that ring I pledged my word that I would not be released from a promise I had made, until the ring should be brought back and returned to me. And he who has the key of it, thanks to you and to my mother, Emmanuel, he is too far from us to ask it of him. He is in Caen. Before you are married 2 months, replied Emmanuel, with an ironic smile, that bracelet will be so irksome to you that you will be the first to get rid of it. I thought I had told you it was locked upon my arm. You know what people do when they have lost the key and cannot get into the house? They send for a locksmith. Well, in my case, Emmanuel, replied Marguerite, raising her voice and extending her arm with a solemn gesture, they must send for the executioner, then for this hand shall be cut off before I give it to another. Silence, silence, cried Emmanuel, raising hastily and looking anxiously towards the door of the inner room. And now I have said all I had to say, rejoined Marguerite. My only hope was in you, Emmanuel, for although you cannot comprehend any deep-seated feeling, you are not cruel. I came to you in tears. Look at me, and you will see that that is true. I came to you to say, brother, this marriage is the misfortune, is the misery of my life. I would prefer a convent. I would prefer death to it. And you have not listened to me. Or if you have listened, you have not understood me. Well, then I will address myself to this man. I will appeal to his honour, to his delicacy. If that should not be sufficient, I will tell him all, my love for another, my weakness, my fault, my crime. I will tell him I have a child, that although he was torn from me, although I have never seen him since, although I am ignorant of his abode, still my child exists. A child cannot die without his death striking some chord within its mother's heart. In short, I will tell him, should it be necessary, that I still love another, that I cannot love him, and that I never will. Well, tell him all this, cried Emmanuel, irritated by her persistence. And that evening we will sign the contract, and the next day you will be Baroness d'Elector. And then, replied Marguerite, then I shall be truly the most miserable woman in existence, for I should then have a brother whom I should no longer love, and a husband for whom I should have no esteem. Farewell, Emmanuel. Believe me, this contract is not yet signed. And after saying these words, Marguerite withdrew with that deep and settled despair upon her features, which could not for a moment be mistaken. And Emmanuel, convinced that he had not, as he had anticipated, obtained a victory, but that the struggle was still to be continued, gazed after her with an anxiety which was not devoid of tenderness. After a few moments of silence, in which he sat pensive and motionless, he turned round and saw Captain Paul, whom he had completely forgotten, standing at the door of the study. And then, considering the vital importance it was to him to get possession of the papers which the captain had offered him, he hurriedly sat down at the table, took a pen and paper, and turning towards him said, "And now, sir, we are again alone, and there is nothing to prevent our at once concluding this affair. In what terms do you wish the promise to be drawn up? Dictate them. I am ready to write them down." "It is now useless," coldly replied the captain. "And why so?" "I have changed my mind." "How is that?" said Emmanuel, rising, alarmed at the consequences which he perceived might arise from words which he was far from expecting. "I will give," replied Paul, with the calmness of a fixed determination, "the 100,000 livres to the child, and I will find a husband for your sister." "Who are you, then?" said Emmanuel, advancing a step towards him. "Who are you, sir, who thus disposes of a young girl, who is my sister, who has never seen you, and who does not even know that you exist?" "Who am I?" replied Paul, smiling. "Upon my honour, I know no more upon that subject than you do, for my birth is a secret which is only to be revealed to me when I have attained my 25th year." "And you will attain that age?" "This evening, sir. I place myself upon your disposal from tomorrow morning to give you all the information you may require of me." And saying these words, Paul bowed. "I allow you to depart, sir, but you will understand it is upon the condition that we meet again." "I was about to propose that condition, Count, and I thank you for having anticipated me." He then bowed to Emmanuel a second time and left the room. At the castle gate, Paul found his horse and servant, and resumed the route to Port Louis. When he had got out of sight of the castle, he alighted from his horse and directed his steps towards a fisherman's hut built upon the beach. At the door of this house, seated upon a bench and in a sailor's dress, was a young man so deeply absorbed in thought that he did not observe Paul's approach. The captain placed his hand upon the young man's shoulder. The other started, looked at him, and became frightfully pale, although the open and joyful countenance of Paul indicated that he was far from being the bearer of bad news. "Well," said Paul to him, "I have seen her." "Who?" demanded the young man. "Marguerite, by heaven." "And?" "She is charming." "I did not ask you that." "She loves you still." "She loves you still." "Gracious heavens!" exclaimed the young man, throwing himself into Paul's arms and bursting into tears. O good old man, how well in thee appears the constant service of the antique world, where service sweat for duty, not for need. Thou art not for the fashion of these times, where none will sweat but for promotion, and having that, do choice their service up even with the having. It is not so with thee. Shakespeare. Although our readers must readily comprehend, after that which we have just related to them, all that had passed in the 6 months during which we had lost sight of our heroes, some details are, however, necessary in order that we should fully understand the new events about to be accomplished. On the evening after the battle between the Indienne and the Drake, and which, notwithstanding our ignorance in naval matters, we have attempted to describe to our readers, Lusignan had related to Paul the history of his whole life. It was a very simple one and contained but few incidents. Love had formed the principal event in it, and after having been its only joy, it had become its greatest grief. The adventurous and independent life of Paul, his station, which had placed him beyond the trammels of society, his caprice, which was superior to all laws, his habit of supreme command on board his own ship, had inspired him with too just a sense of natural rights to obey the order he had received with regard to Lusignan. Moreover, although he had anchored under the French flag, Paul, as we have seen, belonged to the Navy of America, whose cause he enthusiastically espoused. He continued, therefore, his cruise along the shores of England, but finding there was nothing to be done on the sea, he landed at Whitehaven, a small port in Cumberland, at the head of 20 men, among whom was Lusignan, took the fort, spiked the guns, and put to sea again, after having burnt the merchant vessels in the roads. Thence he sailed for the coast of Scotland with the intention of carrying off the Earl of Selkirk and taking him as hostage to the United States. But this project was miscarried from an unforeseen circumstance, that the nobleman having unexpectedly gone to London. In this enterprise, as in the other, Lusignan had seconded him with the courage we have seen him exhibit in the battle between the Indienne and the Drake, so that Paul congratulated himself more than ever upon the chance which had enabled him to oppose an injustice. But it was not enough that he had saved Lusignan from transportation. It was necessary to restore his honour. And to our young adventurer, in whom our readers will doubtless have recognised the celebrated privateersman Paul Jones, it was a more easy matter than to any other person, for having letters of marque from Louis XVI against the English, he had to repair to Versailles to give an account of his cruise. Paul determined upon running into Lorraine, and for the second time cast anchor there, that he might be within a short distance of the Chateau d'Oré. The first answer which the young men received to their inquiries regarding that family was that Marguerite d'Oré was about to be married to M. de Lectour. Lusignan thought himself forgotten, and in the first paroxysm of his despair, insisted, even at the risk of falling into the hands of his former prosecutors, on once more seeing Marguerite, if it was only to reproach her for infidelity. But Paul, more calm and less credulous, made him pledge his word that he would not land until he had heard from him. Then, being assured that the marriage would not take place in less than 15 days, he set out for Paris and was received by the king, who presented him with a sword, the hilt of which was of gold, and decorated him with the Order of Military Merit. Paul had availed himself of the kindness of the king towards him to relate to him Lusignan's adventures, and had obtained not only his pardon, but also as a reward for his late services, the appointment of governor of Guadeloupe. All these cares had not prevented him from keeping sight of Emmanuel. Being informed of the Count's intended departure, he left Paris, and having written to Lusignan appointing a place of meeting, he arrived at Auray an hour after the young Count. After their joyful meeting, Paul and Lusignan remained together until twilight. Then Paul, who, as he had told Emmanuel, had a personal revelation to receive, left his friend and again took the road to Ore. But this time he was on foot, and did not enter the castle, but going along the park wall, he directed his steps towards an iron gate which opened into a wood belonging to the domains of Ore. About an hour before Paul left the fisherman's hut, where he had found Lusignan, a person had preceded him on the road towards the cottage, at which he was to ask the revelation of the secret of his birth. That person was the Marchioness d'Ore, the haughty heiress of the name of Sable. She was attired in her usual mourning garments, with the addition of a long black veil which enveloped her from head to foot. Moreover, the habitation which our young adventurer, with a hesitation of ignorance, was seeking for, was to her familiar. It was a sort of keeper's house, situated at a few paces from the entrance of the park, and inhabited by an old man, in whose behalf the Marquis d'Ore had for 20 years fulfilled one of those acts of sedulous benevolence which had gained for her in that part of Lower Brittany the reputation of rigid holiness which she enjoyed. These attentions to age were given, it is true, with the same gloomy and solemn face which we have observed in her, and which the tender emotions of pity never softened. But they were nevertheless afforded, and all knew it, with careful punctuality. The face of the Marchioness d'Ore was even more grave than it would want to be. While she crossed the park to repair to the dwelling of an old man who was said to be an old servant of the family. The door was standing open as if to allow the last rays of the setting sun to penetrate into the house, so sweet and balmy to old people in the month of May. The house was, however, empty. The Marchioness d'Ore entered it, looked around her, and then, as if certain that the person she was in search of would not be long absent, she resolved to wait his return. She sat down. She had remained there about half an hour, motionless and absorbed in her reflections, when she saw between her and the declining daylight a shadow cast before the door. She slowly raised her eyes and recognized the person she had been expecting. They both started as though they had met by chance, and were not in the habit of seeing each other every day. "It is you, Achard," said the Marchioness, who was the first to speak. "I have been waiting for you half an hour. Where can you have been?" "Had your ladyship walked 50 paces further, you would have found me under the large oak on the edge of the forest." "You know I never walk that way," said the Marchioness with a visible shudder. "And you are wrong, madam. There is one in heaven who has the right to our joint prayers, and who perhaps is astonished to hear only those of old Achard." "And how know you that I do not also pray?" said the Marchioness with a certain degree of feverish agitation. "Do you not believe that the dead require we should constantly kneel on their tombs?" "No," replied the old man with a feeling of profound sorrow. "No, I do not believe that the dead are so extracted, madam. But I believe if any part of us lives underground, it would thrill at the noise caused by the steps of those who we have loved during our life." "But," said the Marchioness in a low and hollow tone, "if that love were a guilty passion—" "However guilty it may have been, madam," replied the old man, also lowering his voice, "do you not believe that blood and tears have expiated it? God was then, believe me, too severe a judge, not to have now become an indulgent father." "Yes, God has perhaps pardoned it," murmured the Marchioness. "But did the world know that which God knows, would it pardon as God has done?" "The world?" exclaimed the old man. "The world? Yes, there is the great word which has again escaped your lips. The world. It is to it, to that phantom, you have sacrificed everything, madam. Your feelings as a lover, your feelings as a wife, your feelings as a mother, your own happiness, the happiness of others. The world? It is the fear of the world which has closed you in your perpetual mourning, beneath which you hope to conceal remorse. And in that you are right, for you have succeeded in deceiving it, for it has taken your remorse for virtue. The Marchioness raised her head with some degree of agitation, and putting aside her veil, that she might look upon the person who had addressed her in such extraordinary language, then after a momentary silence, not being able to discover any sinister expression in the calm features of the old man. "You speak to me," she said to him, "with a bitterness which would lead me to believe that you have some personal reason for reproaching me. Have I failed in any promise I have made? The persons who attend on you by my orders, are they wanting in that respect which I have desired them to observe? You know, if this should be the case, you have only to say a word." "Forgive me, madam. It is in sorrow that I speak, not bitterness. It is the effect of solitude and of age. You must well know what it is to have sorrow that you cannot speak of, tears which we dare not shed, and which fall back drop by drop upon the heart. No, I have not to complain of anyone, madam, since first, from a feeling for which I am truly grateful, without seeking to know whence it emanated, you have been pleased to see personally that my wants were all supplied, and you have not for a single day forgotten your promise. But like the old prophet, I have sometimes seen an angel come as your messenger." "Yes," replied the Marchioness, "I know that Marguerite often accompanies the servant to his, and I have seen with pleasure the attentions she has paid you, and the friendships she feels for you. But in my turn, I have not failed either, I trust, in the promises I made. For 20 years I have lived far from the habitations of men. I have kept away every living being from this dwelling, so much did I fear on your account the delirium of my waking hours or the indiscretions of my dreams. Undoubtedly, and happily this secret has been well preserved," said the Marchioness, placing her hand upon Achard's arm. "But this is a stronger incentive in my mind not to lose in a single day the fruit of 20 years, or more gloomy, more isolated, and more terrible than yours has been. Yes, I understand you perfectly, and you have shuddered more than once upon suddenly remembering that there is roaming about the world a man who may one day call upon me to reveal that secret, and that I have not the right to conceal it from that man. Ah, you tremble at the bare idea, do you not? But tranquilize yourself. That man, when but a boy, fled from the school at which we had placed him in Scotland, and for 10 years past nothing has been heard of him. In short, destined to obscurity, he himself rushed forward to meet his fate. He is now lost amid the millions that crowd this populous world, and not a soul nowheres to find him. This poor unit without a name is lost for ever. He must have lost his father's letter, have mislaid the token by which I was to recognize him, or better still perhaps, he exists no longer." "It is cruel of you, Achard," replied the Marchioness, "to utter such words to a mother. You cannot appreciate the strange feelings and singular contradictions contained in the heart of a woman. For, in fine, can I not be tranquil unless my child is dead? Consider, my old friend, this secret, of which he has been ignorant 25 years. Has it become, at the age of 25, so necessary to his existence that he cannot live unless it is revealed to him? Believe me, Achard, for himself even it would be better he should remain ignorant of it, as he has to this day. I feel assured that to this day he may be happy, old man. Do not mar this happiness. Do not inspire his mind with thoughts which may induce him to commit an evil act. No. Tell him, in lieu of the dreadful tale you are desired to communicate, that his mother has gone to rejoin his father in heaven, and would to God that it was so, but that when dying, for I must see him, whatever you may say to the contrary, I will even, if it be but once, press him to my heart. When dying, as I said, her mother had bequeathed him to her friend the Marchioness d'Ore, in whom he will find a second mother. I understand you, madam, said H.R., smiling. It is not the first time you have pointed out this path in which you wish to lead me astray. Only today you speak more openly. And if you dared to do so, or if you knew me less, you would offer me some reward to induce me to disobey the last injunctions of him who sleeps by us. The Marchioness made a gesture as if about to interrupt him. Listen to me, madam, hastily said the old man, stretching forth his hand, and let my words be considered by you as holy and irrevocable. As faithful as I have been to the promise which I made to the Marchioness d'Ore, so faithful will I be that I made to the Count de Morlex on the day when his son, or your son, shall present himself before me with the token of recognition, and shall demand to know the secret. I shall reveal it to him, madam. As to the papers which attest it, you are aware that they are to be delivered to him only after the death of the Marquis d'Ore. The secret is here, said the old man, placing his hand on his heart. No human power could have extracted it before the time. No human power, that time having arrived, can prevent me from revealing it. The papers are there in that closet, the key of which I always have about me, and it is only by robbery or by assassination that I can be deprived of them. But, said the Marchioness, rising and supporting herself on the arm of her chair, you may die before my husband, old man. For although he is more dangerously ill than you are older than he is, and then what would become of those papers? The priest who shall attend my last moments will receive them under the seal of confession. Ah, it is that, cried the Marchioness, rising, and thus this chain of fears will be prolonged until my death, and the last link of it will be to all eternity riveted to my tomb. There is in this world a man, the only one perhaps, who is as immovable as a rock, and God has placed him in my path, not only as remorse, but as vengeance also. My secret is in your hands, old man. 'Tis well. Do with it as you will. You are the master, and I am your slave. Farewell. So saying, the Marchioness left the cottage and returned towards the chateau. More than 10 years have passed since I beheld him, the noble boy. Now time annuls my oath and cancels all his wrongs. I took a solemn oath to veil the secret, cancel thy rights, while lived her lord, and thus allowed thy youth to quit my roof. Buller, the sea captain. Yes, said the old man, gazing upon the Marchioness as she withdrew. Yes, I know you have a heart of adamant, madam, insensible to every sort of fear, with the exception of that which God has placed within your breast, to supply the place of remorse. But that suffices, and it is dearly buying that reputation you have obtained for virtue to pay the price of such eternal terrors. It is true that the virtue of the Marchioness d'Ore is so firmly established that if truth herself were to rise from the earth, or to descend from the heaven, to arraign her, she would be treated as a calumniator. But God orders all things according to his will, and what he does ordain, his wisdom has long been matured. Rightly reasoned, cried the youthful and sonorous voice, replying to the religious axiom, which the resignation of the old man had led him to utter. Upon my word, good father, you speak like Ecclesiastes. H.R. turned round and perceived Paul, who had arrived just as the Marchioness left him, but who was so absorbed by the scene we have just described that she had not observed the young captain. The latter, seeing the old man alone, approached him, and not hearing the last words he had uttered, had spoken with his usual good humour. H.R., who was surprised by this unexpected appearance, looked at him as if he wished him to repeat that which he had said. "I say," resumed Paul, "that there is more grandeur in resignation that humbly bows itself than in philosophy that doubts. That is a maxim for our Quakers, which, for my eternal welfare, I wish I had less often on my tongue and more frequently in my heart." "I beg your pardon, sir," said the old man on seeing our adventurer, who was fixedly gazing at him while standing with one foot on the threshold of his door. "May I know who you are?" "For the moment," replied Paul, giving his usual free course to his poetic and heedless gaiety, "I am a child of the Republic of Plato, having all humankind for brothers, the world for a country, and possessing upon this earth only the station I have worked out for myself." "And what are you in search of?" continued the old man, smiling in spite of himself at the air of jovial good nature which was spread over the features of the young man. "I am seeking," replied Paul, "at 3 leagues distance from Lorraine, at 500 paces from resembles this one, and in which I am to find an old man, whom it is very likely is yourself. And what is the name of this old man?" "Louis Achard." "That is my name." "Then may the blessings of heaven descend on your white hairs," said Paul, in a voice which at once changed its tone, assuming that of deep feeling and respect. "For here is a letter which I believe was written by my father, in which he says that you are an honest man." "Does not that letter enclose something?" cried Achard, and advancing a step nearer to the young captain. "It does," replied the latter, opening the letter and taking out of it 1/2 of a Venetian sequin, which had been broken in 2. "It seems to be part of a gold coin, in which I have 1/2, and you ought to be the possessor of the other." Achard mechanically held out his hand while gazing with intense interest at the young man. "Yes, yes," said the old man, and eyes gradually becoming more and more suffused with tears. "Yes, this is the true token, and more than that, the extraordinary resemblance," and opening his arms, he cried, "Child, oh my God, my God!" "What is it?" cried Paul, extending his arms to support the old man, who was quite overcome by his emotions. "Oh, can you not comprehend?" replied the latter. "Can you not comprehend that you are a living portrait of your father, and that I loved your father, loved him so much that I would have shed my blood, have given my life to serve him, as I would now for you, young man, were you to demand it?" "Embrace me then, my old friend," said Paul, throwing his arms around the old man. "For the chain of feeling, believe me, is not broken, which extends from the tomb of the father to the cradle of the son. Whatever my father may have been, if in order to resemble him, it be only necessary to have a conscience without reproach, undoubted courage, and a memory which never forgets a benefit conferred, although it may sometimes forget an injury, if this be so, then I am, as you have said, my father's living portrait, and more so in soul than in form." "Yes, he possessed all these," replied the old man with solemnity, and clasping Paul to his breast, looking at him with affection through tearful tenderness. "Yes, he had the same commanding voice, the same flashing eyes, the same nobleness of heart. But why was it that I have not seen you sooner, young man? I have during my life passed many gloomy hours, which your presence would have brightened." "Why? Because this letter told me to seek you out only when I should attain the age of 25, and because it is not long since I attained that age, not more than 1 hour ago." The old man bowed down his head with a pensive air and remained silent for some time, seemingly absorbed by the recollection of the past. "Can it be so?" at length he said, raising his head. "Can it be 25 years? Good heaven! It appears to me only yesterday that you were born in this house, that you first saw the light in that very room," and the old man raised his head and pointed to a door which led into another room. Paul, in his turn, appeared to reflect, and then, looking around him to strengthen by the aid of objects which presented themselves to his view, the recollections which crowded on his memory. "In this cottage, in that room," he repeated. "And I lived here till I was 5 years old, did I not?" "Yes," murmured the old man, as if fearful to disturb the feelings which were taking possession of the young man's mind. "Well," continued Paul, leaning his head on both of his hands as if to concentrate his thoughts, "allow me for one moment to look back in my turn to the past, for I am recollecting a room which I had thought I had seen in a dream. It may be that one. Listen to me. Oh, how strange it is! Remembrances now rush upon me." "Speak, my child, speak," said the old man. It be that room. There ought to be on the right as you go in, at the end of the room, a bed with green hangings. Yes. A crucifix at the head of the bed. Yes. A closet opposite, in which were books, among the rest a large Bible with numerous engravings. There it is, said the old man, pointing to the sacred book which was lying open on a desk for prayer. "Oh, it is that, cried Paul, pressing his lips against the leaves. "Oh, good and pious heart," cried the old man, "I thank thee, O my God, I thank thee." Then said Paul, rising, "In that room there is a window from which we can discern the sea, and on the sea 3 islands." "Yes, Hawat, Hodek, and Bali-on-Mer." "Then it is really so," said Paul, rushing towards the room. And then, perceiving that the old man was about to follow him, he said, No, I must be alone. Let me enter it alone. I feel that I must be alone," and he went into the room, closing the door behind him. He then paused a moment, impressed with that holy respect which accompanies the remembrance of our infancy. The room was as he described it, for the religious devoutness of the old servant had preserved it from any change. Paul, feeling doubtless that the eye of a stranger would have interrupted the expression of the feelings he experienced, and now certain of being alone, abandoned himself to them, he slowly advanced and with clasped hands towards the ivory crucifix, and falling on his knees, which formerly he had the habit of doing morning and evening, he endeavoured to remember one of those simple prayers in which as a child, still on the threshold of this life, prayed to God for those who had opened its gates to him. What events had succeeded each other in the lapse of time, which had passed between these genuflections, Paul remained for a considerable time absorbed in thought, and then slowly arose and went to the window. The night was beautiful and calm. The moon was shining in the heavens and tipped the ocean waves with silver. The 3 islands appeared on the horizon like blue vapour floating on the ocean. He remembered how often in his infancy he had leaned against that window, gazing upon the same scene, following with his eyes some bark with its snowy sails which glided silently over the sea, like the wing of a night bird. Then his heart swelled with sweet and tender recollection, his head fell upon his chest, and silent tears ran down his cheeks. At that moment he felt someone pressed his hands. It was the old man. He wished to conceal his emotions, but instantly repented this vain feeling. He turned towards Achard and frankly let him see his face, down with which tears were streaming. "You weep, my child," said the old man. "Yes, I weep," replied Paul, "and why should I conceal it? Yea, look at me. And yet I have, during my life, witnessed dreadful scenes. I have seen the tempest bear my vessel to the summit of a mountain wave, and then sink her into an abyss, from which I thought she would never rise again, and I felt that she weighed no more upon the wings of the storm than does a dried leaf on the evening breeze. I have seen men fall around me, like the ripe ears of corn before the sickle of the reaper. I have heard the cries of distress and the dying groans of those whose meal I had shared but the day before. In order to receive their last sigh, I had walked amidst the showers of bullets and grape shot upon the planks slippery with blood. And yet amidst all this, my soul was calm, my eyes remained unmoist. But this room, see you, this room, of which I have had retained so holy a remembrance, this room in which I have received the first caresses of a father whom I shall never see again, and the last kisses of a mother who perhaps desires no more to see me, this room is sacred as a candle and as a tomb. I cannot thus revisit it without giving vent to my emotions. I must weep, or I shall suffocate. The old man clasped him in his arms. Paul leaned his head upon his shoulder, and during some time nothing was heard but his sobs. At length the old servant rejoined, "Yes, you are right. This room is at once a cradle and a tomb. It was there that you were born." He pointed to one corner with his hand. "It was there that you received the last blessing of your father," continued he, pointing to the opposite side of the room. "He is then dead," said Paul. "He is dead." "You must tell me how he died." "I will tell you all." "Defer it for a moment," added Paul, as he reached a chair and seated himself, "for I am now too weak to listen to you. Let me recover myself." He placed his elbow on the window-sill, leaned his head upon his hand, and once more cast his eyes upon the sea. "What a magnificent spectacle is the ocean when the moon shines upon it as brightly as it does now," continued he, with that accent of soft melancholy which was habitual to him. "It is as calm as God himself, and vast as eternity. I do not believe that a man accustomed to study such a scene can be afraid of death. My father met his death bravely, did he not?" "Assuredly, proudly," replied Achard. "It could not be otherwise," continued Paul, "for I remember my father, although I was only 4 years old when I last saw him." "He was a handsome young man, as you yourself are," said Achard, looking sorrowfully at Paul, "and just as old as you are. What was his name?" "The Count de Morax." "Then I also am of an old and noble family. I also have arms and an escutcheon, as well as these young and insolent nobles who ask me for my parchments when I show them my wounds. Wait, young man, wait. Do not allow pride to carry you thus away. For I have not yet told you the name of her who gave you being, and you are still ignorant of the dreadful secret of your birth." "Well, be it so. I shall not with less respect and veneration hear the name of my mother. What was my mother's name?" "The Marchioness d'Ore," slowly replied the old man, as if regretting that he was compelled to mention her name. "What is it that you tell me?" cried Paul, starting from his chair and seizing the hands of the old man. "The truth," replied Achard sorrowfully. "Then Emmanuel is my brother, Marguerite is my sister? Do you then already know them?" exclaimed the old man, much astounded. "Oh, you were right, old man," said Paul, throwing himself into his chair. "God orders all things according to his will, and what he does ordain, his wisdom has long before matured." They both remained silent for a time, when at length Paul raised his head and resolutely fixed his eyes on the old man's face, said, "Now I am ready to hear all you have to communicate. You may go on." "I shall a tale unfold, will harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood, make thy 2 eyes like stars start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end. like quills upon the fretful porcupine. Shakespeare. The old man seemed to be summing up his recollections for a time, and then began. They were affianced to each other. I know not what mortal hate it was that arose between the families and separated them. The Count de Morlaix, broken-hearted, could not remain in France. He sailed for Saint Domingo, where his father possessed a large estate. I accompanied him, for the Count de Morlaix reposed much confidence in me. I was a son of her who had nursed him. I had received the same education as himself. He used to call me his brother, and I alone remembered the distance which nature had placed between us. The Marquis de Morlaix confided to me the charge of watching over his son, for I loved him with all the love of a father. We remained 2 years under a tropical sun. During that 2 years your father, lost amid the solitude of that magnificent island, a traveller without an object and without an aim, an ardent and indefatigable sportsman, endeavouring to cure the griefs of the mind by the fatigues of the body. But so far from succeeding, one would have thought his heart became still more inflamed under that ardent sun. At length, after 2 years of trial and incessant struggles, his love conquered. He must either see her again or die. I yielded, and we set sail for France. Never was a voyage more beautiful or more prosperous. The sea and sky seemed to smile upon us, so favourably were they that it would have induced one to believe in lucky omens. 6 weeks after our departure from Port-au-Prince, we landed at Havre. Mademoiselle de Sable was married. The Marquis d'Ory was at Versailles, fulfilling at the court of Louis XV the duties of his charge, and his wife, who was too much indisposed to follow him, were at the Château d'Ory, the turrets of which you see from this place. Yes, yes, said Paul. I know it. Please go on. As to myself, rejoined the old man, during our voyage, one of my uncles, an old servant of the house of Ory, had died, and left me this small house, with a small quantity of land surrounding it. I took possession of it. Your father had left me at Venice, telling me he was going to Paris. And for the whole of the first year that I inherited this house, I did not see him. One night, it is exactly 25 years ago, someone knocked on my door. I went to open it and found your father there, carrying in his arms a woman whose face was veiled. He brought her into this room and laid her on that bed, and then returning to me in the adjoining room, where I was waiting mute and motionless with astonishment, he placed his hand upon my shoulder, and looking at me in a supplicating manner, although he had the right to command me, said, "Louis, you can do more than save my life and honour. You can save the life and honour of her I love. Get on horseback, gallop to the next town, and return here in an hour with the doctor." He spoke to me in that short and hasty tone which indicated that there was not a moment to be lost. I immediately obeyed. The day was beginning to break when we returned. The doctor was introduced by the Count de Morlaix into this room, the door of which was immediately closed. He remained there during the whole day, towards 5 in the afternoon. The doctor left the house, and at nightfall your father also left the house, carrying in his arms the mysterious veiled lady whom he had brought the previous night. When they had gone, I came into this room and found you here. You had just been born. And how did you learn that this woman was the Marchioness d'Ory? Oh, explained the old man, in a way which was as terrible as it was unexpected. I had offered the Count de Morlaix to keep you here, and he accepted my proposal. From time to time, he would come to spend an hour with you. Alone? Demanded Paul with much anxiety. Yes, always. But as he had given me permission to walk with you in the park, it would sometimes happen that at the corner of one of those avenues I would meet the Marchioness. whom chance appeared to have conducted in that direction. She would make you a sign to come to her, and she would kiss you as people kiss a strange child because he is handsome. 4 years passed on in this way, and then one night, someone again knocked at this door, and it was again your father. He was more calm, but had perhaps a more gloomy look than on the first occasion. "Louis," said he, "tomorrow, at the break of day, I have to meet the Marquis d'Ore. It is a duel in which one of us must fall, and you are to be the only witness of it. The terms are agreed upon. You must therefore give me shelter for this night, and let me have materials for writing." He sat down at this table, on the very chair you are now seated. Paul sprang up, but supported himself on the back of the chair, without again sitting down upon it. He sat up all night. At daybreak, he came into my room and found me up. I had not gone to bed. As to you, poor child, unconscious of the passions and miseries of this life, you were quietly sleeping. And then, pray go on. Your father bent slowly over you, supporting himself by the wall, and looking sorrowfully upon you. "Louis," said he to me, in a hollow voice, "should I be killed, and which may happen, woe to this child. You will deliver to him with this letter Field, my valet de chambre, who I have charged to conduct him to Selkirk in Scotland, there to leave him in sure hands. When he is 25 years old, he will bring you the other half of this gold coin, and will ask you to reveal to him the secret of his birth. You will communicate it, for then perhaps his mother will be alone and isolated. As to these papers which prove his birth, you will not deliver them to him until after the death of the Marquis d'Ore. Now I have said all that is necessary. Let us go, for it is the appointed hour." He then leaned over your bed, bent down towards you, and although he was a man of fortitude, as I have told you, I saw a tear fall upon your cheek. "Proceed," said Paul, in a voice choked with emotion. "The rendezvous was in one of the avenues of the park, about 100 paces from this house. When we reached the place, we found the Marquis there. He had been waiting for us some minutes. Near him upon a bank were pistols ready loaded. The adversaries bowed to each other without exchanging a word. The Marquis pointed to the weapons. They each took one, and then, according to the terms which had been agreed upon, as your father has told me, they placed themselves mute and gloomily at the distance of 30 paces, and then began to walk towards each other. "Oh, it was a moment of agony for me, I can assure you," rejoined the old man, almost as much moving as if the scene were then actually passing before him, when I saw the distance gradually diminishing between these two men. When they were only about 10 paces, the Marquis stopped and fired. I looked at your father, not a muscle of his face was moved, so that I thought him safe and unhurt. He continued to walk on till he came close to the Marquis, and then placed the muzzle of his pistol to his heart. "He did not kill him, I trust?" cried Paul, seizing the old man's arm. "He said to him, 'Your life is in my hands, sir, and I might take it, but I wish you to live, that you may pardon me as I do you.' And uttering these words, he fell dead at the feet of the Marquis, whose ball had passed through his chest. "Oh, my father," cried Paul, wringing his hands. "And the man who killed my father, he still lives, does he not? He is still young and has strength enough to wield a sword or raise a pistol. We will go to him, today, instantly. You will tell him that it is his son that he must fight with." "God has avenged your father," replied Achard. "That man is mad." "That is true, I had forgotten that," murmured Paul. "And in his madness that bloody scene is ever before his eyes, and repeats 10 times a day the dying words your father addressed to him. And that must be the reason why the Marchioness will not leave him for a single moment." And that is also the reason, under the pretext that he will not see his children, that keeps Emmanuel and Marguerite from him. My poor sister, said Paul, with an accent of undefinable tenderness. And now she wishes to sacrifice her by forcing her to marry that wretch Lector. Yes, but that wretch Lector will take Marguerite with him to Paris and give a regiment of dragoons to her brother, so that the Marchioness will no longer have cause to dread the presence of her children. Her secret, therefore, remains henceforth in the breast of two old men, who tomorrow, this night even, may die. The grave is silent. But you, does she know that you still exist? Has anything been heard of you since you escaped from Selkirk? Could not some accident have prevented you from coming to this appointment, which fortunately you have done safely? It is certain that she has not forgotten you, but she hopes. Oh, can you believe that my mother— I beg your pardon, that is true, I do not believe it, cried Achard. I was wrong, forget what I have said. Yes, let us speak of you, my friend, let us speak of my father. Is it necessary that I should tell you that his last wishes were fulfilled? Field came to fetch you during the day and took you away with him. 21 years have passed since then, and since then not a single day has passed without my putting up a prayer that I might see you at the appointed time. My prayers have been granted, continued the old man. And thanks be to God you are here. Your father lives again in you. I once more see him. I am speaking to him. I weep no longer. I am now consoled. And he died thus instantly, without a struggle, without a sigh? Yes, I brought him here. I placed him on the bed in which you were born. I closed the door that no one might enter the house, and I went alone and dug his grave. I passed the whole day in this painful duty, for according to the request of your father, to no one was to be confined this dreadful secret. In the evening I returned for the body. The heart of man is singularly constituted, and hope which God has planted in it can with difficulty be eradicated. I had seen him fall. I had felt his hands grow cold. I had kissed his ice-like face. I had left him to hollow out his grave, and that grave being made, that duty being accomplished, I returned with a beating heart. For it appeared to me, although a miracle would be required for such a change, that during my absence life had returned to him, and that he would rise from his bed and speak to me. I entered the house. Alas, alas, the days of miracles have passed away. Lazarus remained lying on his couch. Dead, dead, dead. And the old man remained for some time overwhelmed with grief, silent and voiceless, and tears rolling down his furrowed cheeks. Yes, cried Paul, also bursting into tears. Yes, and you then fulfilled your holy mission. Good old man, let me kiss those hands which deposited my father in his last home. And you have remained faithful to his tomb, as you had been to him during life. Poor guardian of the sceptre, you have remained near him that your tears might water the grass which grew about the unknown grave. Oh, how little are those who think themselves great because their names resound amidst the tempest, and the cry of war, louder than the storm or the din of battle, in comparison with you, old man, whose devotedness has been mute and noiseless. Oh, give me your blessing, lay those hallowed hands upon my head, since my father is not here to bless me, continued Paul, throwing himself on his knees before him. Rise to my arms. Let me clasp you to my heart, my child, for you exaggerate these actions, in themselves so simple and so natural. And then believe me, that which you term my piety has not been a useless lesson. I have seen how little space a man occupies beneath the ground, and how soon he is lost amid the world, should God turn his face from him. Your father was young, full of courage, with a brilliant career opening before him. Your father was the last descendant of an ancient line. He bore a noble name. His path seemed marked with honours and distinction. He had a family and powerful friends. Well, he suddenly disappeared, as if the earth had opened beneath his feet. I know not if some tearful eyes sought for him till they lost all trace of him, but this I know, that for 21 years no one has sought out his tomb. No one knows that he lies beneath that spot, where the grass is greener and grows more luxuriantly than elsewhere. And yet, vain and glorious and miserable as he is, man considers himself of some value. Oh, and my mother, has she not visited his grave? The old man did not answer. Well then, there will be 2 of us, who henceforth will know the spot where he is reposed. Come and show it to me, for I will return to it, I promise solemnly, every time my ship returns to the coast of France. Saying this, he drew Achard into the outer room, but as they opened the door they heard a slight noise in the park. It was a servant from the castle who had accompanied Marguerite. Paul hurriedly returned into the bedroom. "It is my sister," said he to Achard. "Leave me alone with her a moment. It is necessary that I should speak to her. I have something to communicate which will make her pass a happy night. We must have compassion for those who watch and weep." "Reflect," said Achard, "that the secret I have revealed to you is your mother's. Fear not. I will speak to her but of that which concerns herself." At that moment Marguerite entered the room. "This ring I gave him when he parted from me, to bind him to remember my good will. The more shame for him that he sends it to me." Shakespeare. Marguerite had come, as she frequently did, to bring some provisions for the old man, and it was not without astonishment that she perceived in the outer room where she usually found Achard, a young and handsome man, who looked at her with gladdened eyes and with a kindly smile. She made a sign to the servant to put down the basket in the corner of the room. He obeyed, and then went out to wait for his mistress in the park. When he had withdrawn, she advanced towards Paul, saying, "I beg your pardon, sir, but I expected to find my old friend Achard here, and I came to bring him something from my mother." Paul pointed to the inner room, to let her know that the person she was seeking was within, for he could not reply to her. He felt that the tone of his voice would betray the emotion he experienced. The young girl thanked him with a bow and went into the room to find Achard. Paul followed her with his eyes, his hand pressed upon his heart. That virgin soul into which love had never penetrated now expanded with fraternal tenderness. Isolated, as he had always been, having no friends but the rude children of the ocean, all that was soft of tender in his heart he had turned towards God. And although, in the eyes of rigid Christianity, his religion might not have appeared as strictly orthodox, it is no less true that the poetry which overflowed in every word he uttered was nothing more than one vast and external prayer. It was not, therefore, astonishing that this first feeling which penetrated his heart, although purely fraternal, was as extravagant and transporting as the emotions of love. "Oh," murmured he, "poor isolated being that I am, how shall I be able to restrain my feelings when she returns, and prevent myself from clasping her to my heart and saying to her, 'Marguerite, my sister, no woman has yet felt love for me. Love me then with sisterly affection.' Oh, mother, mother, by depriving me of your caresses, you have also deprived me of those of this dear angel." "Farewell," said Marguerite to the old man, opening the door. "Farewell. I wish this evening to come myself, for I know not when I may see you again." As she went towards the outer door, pensive and with her eyes cast down, without seeing Paul, without remembering that a stranger was in that room, Paul remained gazing at her with outstretched arms, as if to prevent her from leaving the house, with palpitating heart and moistened eyes. At length, when he saw her placing her hand upon the door latch, he cried aloud, "Marguerite!" She turned round amazed, but not being able to comprehend this strange familiarity, in one which was totally unknown to her, she half opened the door. "Marguerite!" reiterated Paul, advancing a step towards his sister. "Marguerite, do you not hear me call you?" "It is true that my name is Marguerite, sir," she replied, with dignity, "but I could not imagine that word was addressed to me by a person whom I have the honour of knowing." "But I know you," explained Paul, going nearer to her, and then closing the door, he brought her back into the room. "I know that you are unhappy, that you have not one friendly heart into which you can pour your sorrows, not one arm from which you can ask support." "You forget the one which is on high," remarked Marguerite, raising her eyes and hand toward heaven. "No, no, Marguerite, I do not forget, for it is he who sends me to offer you that which you most need, to tell you when all lips and all hearts are closed towards you, I am your friend, devotedly, eternally." "Oh, sir," replied Marguerite, "these are sacred and solemn words which you have uttered, words unfortunately to which it would be difficult for me to give credence without proofs." "And should I give you one?" said Paul. "Impossible," murmured Marguerite. "Irrefragable," continued Paul. "Oh, then," exclaimed Marguerite with an indescribable accent, in which doubt began to give place to hope. "Well, and then?" "Oh, then, but no, no." "Do you know this ring?" said Paul, showing her the one with the key that opened the bracelet. "Gracious me!" exclaimed Marguerite. "Have mercy upon me. He is dead." "He lives? Then he no longer loves me. He loves you. If he is living, if he is still love, oh, I shall go mad. What was it I was saying? If he be living, if he still loves me, how come it is that this ring is in your possession? He confided it to me as a token of recognition." "And have I confided this bracelet to anyone?" cried Marguerite, pushing back the sleeve of her gown. "Look!" "Yes, but you, Marguerite, you are not proscribed, dishonoured, in the eyes of the whole world, thrown amongst a condemned race. Of what importance is that? Is he not innocent? And then, he thought," continued Paul, wishing to discover the extent of the devotedness and love of his sister, "he thought that delicacy required, banished as he is for ever from society, that he should offer you, if not restore to you, the liberty of disposing of your hand. When a woman has done for a man that which I have done for him," required Marguerite, "her only excuse is to love him eternally, and it is that I mean to do." "Oh, you are an angel!" exclaimed Paul. "Tell me," rejoined Marguerite, seizing the young man's hands and looking at him with a supplicating air. "What? Have you seen him then?" "I am his friend and his brother." "Speak to me of him then," she exclaimed, giving herself up entirely to the recollection of her lover, and forgetting that it was the first time she had seen the person to whom she was addressing questions of so delicate a nature. "What is he doing? What hope has he, poor unhappy man?" "He loves you, and he hopes again to see you." Then, stammered Marguerite, and drawing back some paces, "He has told you?" "All." "Oh," she cried, looking down and concealing her face, over which a sudden tinge of red had cast itself, replacing for a moment its habitual paleness. Paul approached her, and clasping her to his breast, exclaiming, "You are a miracle of devoutness." "You do not then despise me, sir?" said Marguerite, venturing to raise her eyes. "Marguerite," cried Paul, "had I a sister, I would pray to heaven that she might resemble you." Oh, were it so, you would have a most unhappy sister, she replied, leaning upon his arm and bursting into tears. Perhaps, said Paul, smiling. You know not, then? Proceed. The Monsieur the Lector is to arrive tomorrow morning? I have been informed of that. And that tomorrow night the marriage contract is to be signed? I know that too. Well then, what can I hope for in such extremity as this? To whom could I apply to prevent this hated union? Who can I interest to aid me? My brother? God knows that I forgive him, but he cannot comprehend my feelings. My mother? Oh, sir, you do not know my mother. She is a woman whose reputation is unsullied, of the most austere virtue, and her will inflexible, for never having failed in her duty, she does not believe that others can forget it. And when she has once said, "It is my will," all that remains to do is to bow down one's head, to weep and to obey. My father, yes, I well know that my father must leave the room from which he has never stirred for 20 years to sign this contract. My father, for anyone less unhappy and less culpable than I, might prove a resource. But you know not that he is insane, that he has lost his reason, and with it every feeling of paternal affection. And besides, it is 10 years since I last saw him. For the last 10 years I have not pressed his trembling hands, nor kissed his snow-white hairs. He knows not that he is still a daughter. He knows not even whether he has a heart, and will not be able to even recognize. And were he but to know me, and took passion on me, my mother would place a pen in his hand and would say, "Sign that, it is my will." And he would sign it. The poor feeble old man and his daughter would be condemned. Yes, yes, I know all this as well as you do, my poor child. But be pacified. That contract never will be signed. And who can prevent it? I will. You? Do not despair. Tomorrow I shall be present at the family council. Who will present you there? I have the means. My brother is violent and passionate. Oh, good heaven, beware, while striving to save me, that you do not sink me still deeper in misery. Your brother's person is in my eyes as sacred as your own, Marguerite. Fear nothing, and rely confidently upon me. Oh, I believe in you, sir, and I implicitly confide in you, said Marguerite, as if overwhelmed by the contending feelings of confidence and mistrust which she had still then laboured under. For what advantage could you derive from endeavouring to deceive me? What interest could you have to betray me? None, undoubtedly. But let us talk about other matters. What line of conduct do you intend to pursue with regard to the Baron de Lector? I will tell him all. Oh, cried Paul, bowing profusely, allow me to adore you. Sir, murmured Marguerite, sir? As a sister, as a sister. Yes, you are indeed kind and good, cried Marguerite, and I believe it is God who sent you to my aid. Believe it, replied Paul. Then tomorrow evening. Do not be astonished nor alarmed at anything that may occur. Only contrive to let me know by letter, by a word, a sign, the result of your interview with Lector. I will endeavour to do so. It is now late, and your servant may be surprised at the length of this interview. Return to the castle, and say not a word of me to anyone. Farewell. Farewell, reiterated Marguerite, you to whom I know not what name to give. Call me brother. Farewell then, brother. Oh, my sister, cried Paul, clasping her convulsively in his arms. Your lips are the first from which I have heard so sweet a word. God will reward you for it. The young girl drew back amazed, and then returned to Paul. She held out a hand to him. Paul again pressed it, and Marguerite left the cottage. The young man then went to the door of the inner room and opened it. And now, good old man, he said, conduct me to my father's grave.